Thank you. So if we're going to jump right into questions, might as well just jump right into one of the more difficult ones.
Sure, great.
Financing.
Financing.
Yeah. So your financial experience, I've certainly read your resume. It's impressive for sure.
Thanks.
But what challenges have you faced in your career so far?
I think the biggest challenge, as I kind of noted in the letter of interest, is coming out of grad school. I didn't have any direct administrative experience, and I know that's a field I wanted to be in, and that's why I sort of pivoted away from public education, enrolled in UMass, got those dual degrees, knew I wanted to get into administration. I just really enjoy municipal policy and sort of all those facets. So as I kind of noted, I think the biggest challenge was I didn't have that direct municipal experience going into Williamsburg, and my predecessor was kind of on her way to her next job, and I had very little in the terms of like formal training. So it was a lot of on-the-job training, and those first months were exceedingly difficult, largely because I had to interact with a new board of selectmen. I had to kind of understand the way they like to govern that relationship between the administrator. I was learning obviously new names, but, making my rounds through town offices, through the various departments, understanding their roles, their abilities, and how they've put that forward. So in totality, I had very little, and I had to make it all work and quickly keep town running. And at that time, I was sort of handed off a number of projects that were partially started, nearly completed. So I just found myself having to pick up a lot of the predecessor's work and figure it out and keep the town operational and just keep things going. And I think I did that pretty effectively, especially going into my first town meeting a few months later.
And how did you assess the needs of the community?
Largely, so Williamsburg is a really dynamic community. It's really rich in volunteers. They have this amazing group of people that are constantly interested in moving the community forward and improving quality of life. Right. So I really did a lot of listening in those first months. There was a number of ongoing projects as it relates to work with MassDOT and some other transformative transportation projects that are going on. So it was a lot of listening at first, getting to know people, getting to understand the work that the planning board is doing. We have this really dynamic group called the Mill River Greenway, who's instrumental in furthering the extension of the Mass Central Rail Trail. And through that listening process, you start to kind of put the pieces together and realize, all right, where are they going to fall? What are the timelines looking like? What are the resources they need? How is that support going to manifest through the administrator's office, through the board of selectmen, what we bring to town meeting, and what we kind of put forward to the community?
Okay, that answers most of it. Just
sure.
Budget cuts. They're always tough.
Budget cuts.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how did you determine what departments that you work with in Williamsburg could remain the same, have budget cuts, work with the community? How did that factor in?
So in my 3 years, we haven't had to actually cut anything. It's a pretty shoestring operation year over year. Okay. So Williamsburg's cash reserves are pretty strong in the sort of free cash area, and the stabilization, they're conservative in those respects in those accounts, so they can kind of bolster budgets when they need to. It's not often we bring on new staff year over year, so what we see typically is the same sort of annual inflationary pressures around utilities, health insurance costs. We're pretty stable year over year. And although the town has sort of a high tax rate comparatively to the rest of the Commonwealth, the operating budget's just about $9 million, and most of those increases kind of fall into the education field. So we're about 54% going to education. Their choices are their own, and they submit those budgets through their school committees and so forth. So we've actually fortunately never had to cut anyone. But that said, we're not growing exponentially, and we don't have some of the stronger best practice in terms of a pay scale or salary ranges. So everything's kind of contingent on cost of living adjustments, and those are discussed at the finance committee. So I work closely with them throughout that process, and we're pretty keenly aware of what's coming in terms of local receipts, state aid, and so forth.
Just one more thing.
Yep.
So in your research about the town of Lenox, how do you think we fare as compared to our abutting towns and within the state as far as cash reserves, as far as taxes and so forth. Where do you think we stack up, and how would you manage that?
Yeah, at a quick snapshot, I mean, you have your tax rate is less than $10 per 1,000, which seems incredible. Like, I've never worked in a community with one such low. I mean, obviously your valuations are quite high, so your 2.5 limitations, kind of grow, I think, a little further than your operating costs appear to be growing. You have a pretty significant amount of tax levy capacity in that prospects. And, just if I'm remembering correctly, you're just above 10% in reserves. You do seem to carry a number of different stabilization accounts. There's like a fire apparatus account, a public works account, maybe, things like that. So, obviously auditors want to see at least 10% in those reserves, equivalent to your budget. So, 35 million, I think you're well above that. So by all accounts, Lenox feels very strong in those financial capacities. But it's important to, be fiscally prudent and manage those, with respect to the taxpayers.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Nick.
Hey,
So
hi.
Lennox residents are highly engaged in our local government.
Great.
So how would you manage constituent concerns and engage on contentious issues? And also, can you share an example where you successfully navigated difficult feedback from the public?
Okay, yeah, so having spent 8 years on the Pittsfield City Council, I can empathize with the work that this board does and that relationship to the public and being responsive to voters. So over that time, there was no shortage of sort of contentious constituent comments or, frankly, some very friendly ones. So I think I've developed those skills, at the onset of all these conversations. It's a matter of listening first, making sure the person feels heard, trying to explain sort of where their comments fall within the greater process, helping them. I've always kind of found that sometimes when we deal with constituent comments, they're not entirely reflective of like the on-the-ground government operations. So I always felt like it was really important for me to kind of get across like what happens at City Hall is this, and it's a little different than what you think is going on. And that's repetitive, and we work with that, and then you can have those same conversations over and over again. In terms of like a specific example, the town of Williamsburg is engaged in a pretty contentious transportation project that involves sort of redesigning about 700 feet on a very nice like neighborhood road. There's been a lot of disagreement on design choices, what makes sense, what's reflective of those needs. So we just continue to engage with those residents over time. And I think it would have tried to communicate to our board is, allow them to space to make their comments, hear them, take that information back, use it to inform your decision making. And that feels really emblematic of all the times I had to work through Pittsfield. The city council often falls, in Pittsfield particularly, it's largely kind of like a mayor-driven legislative process, and the council acts as that sort of like check and balance to that thing. So you never kind of quite know where the political winds are going to be blowing and shifting, so we have to be responsive to those things. And I would host a lot of neighborhood meetings. Some were very delightful, some were a little less delightful, but they were beneficial to the community, and I think that resonated with voters.
Great. Thank you very much.
You have practically answered this question in the first two responses because they've been pretty well thought out. Managing the select board. Mm-hmm. We all, I think for the exception of the one guy who isn't here, have sat in my seat, sat in a first-time seat, and have also been asked to fill in a temporary position and sat in your seat.
Oh, really?
So some folks are, very knowledgeable from their outside endeavors, company endeavors. Some are because we're, more active in politics. Some are just, fixtures in the town for ages and ages and ages. So I think we all attempt to very much respect each other. We very much have always, when someone reaches out to only one of us, we're like, hey, I'm not the mayor.
Yeah.
Let's include everybody in the conversation.
Right.
And I would just say, what's your experience, or how does that feel to you?
Yeah, I think anytime you're coming into or potentially coming into these new positions, I think setting and defining expectations at the onset. So really trying to understand how the board views its relationship with the administrator or the manager in this case. And, kind of working within those parameters, within those confines to, again, at the end of the day, we're all here to further the quality of life for the residents of Lenox, and it's really kind of a team effort, and that trickles down to all the various departments. So I think absolutely setting and understanding those expectations. Is your board particularly hands-on? Do you like to be hands-off? And then what are sort of the strengths and areas that we can kind of collaborate, and we can kind of, as you noted, people have these really interesting backgrounds that can be really helpful in moving government forward in all sorts of ways, and it's kind of identifying that, putting them into buckets, putting them into pockets, making sure we're aware of those concepts. But if we don't identify expectations at the onset, and we're kind of working with these presumptions, I think that is where your problems lie, is that, well, you've never said it explicitly, so you have to implicitly understand that, and that can be really, really difficult.
Thank you.
So, Lenox is similar to your town, except bigger, and we have several different departments.
Right.
How do you view working with all the different departments so they work collaboratively and work together and get the job done?
Sure. Yeah. So I think my time on the city council, if you were to talk to people in City Hall at that time, what I often did was made efforts to engage with departments and with persons in those departments to really understand kind of the work they're doing. And from that sort of bird's eye view, you can kind of glean the patterns, the synergy, where those things are. And at the end of the day, again, everyone is on the same team moving forward in terms of quality of life, supporting taxpayers, making sure public services are delivered. So it was inevitably some of that work that pushed me to transition out of public education towards municipal government, was seeing all these great things. So, I was never directly exposed to the work that, city planners were doing, or building inspectors. Those are just incredibly nuanced, bureaucratic things, but critically important to sort of everyone in the community. So I made the time to engage with them, have those conversations. Oftentimes, our city council could have some very strong personalities that had disagreements with department heads and staff, and they, at times they may have felt personal, but I never felt like that was my job. It was to kind of help them. It was kind of understand what they're doing, what are the resources they need, and how do we balance that against all of the other sort of financial inputs. But I really think I made a concerted effort to engage with municipal employees and kind of understand their work they do, and that has trickled out over formalizing it from education, doing that work in Williamsburg. So I really think I have a good understanding of those little things and how they fit into the larger picture.
Yeah, I agree. You went from Pittsfield to Williamsburg, two completely different
Sure.
dynamics,
Yep.
and you seem to understand both. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I'll take
no,
drinks or whatever. I want to.
So in Lenox, we have a lot. We do a lot here.
Yeah.
We're not afraid to take care of our infrastructure. You could say which is more important, whether it's the historical value of old buildings we have, library, et cetera,
Right.
or brand new roads that need repair, water departments, sewer department. Everything we try to do the best we can to keep them running the way they should and updated and just moving forward all the time on those fronts. So what kind of experience have you gotten, any kind of capital planning that would cover us in all those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the capital planning in Williamsburg kind of flows to the administrator's office, especially around budget time. So like I said, Williamsburg does have a healthy sort of reserve in their free cash, so they're often willing to sort of appropriate substantial investment sums, particularly like highway and the fire and the police department in the form of like vehicles, new equipment and things like that. So I have a good understanding of those like facets. And then, Williamsburg, obviously these small rural towns face a lot of the same problems with old infrastructure. And so Williamsburg, from a water sewer standpoint, if you're located on Route 9 or close proximity, you're able to tie into the sewer and the water system. A lot of people are dealing with wells and septic, which are kind of their own, private parts of things. We just finished a public safety complex combining our police department, our fire department into a new building. They had been working out of facilities that were inadequate for their needs of today, over 100 years old. And now what we're seeing is that we've got to make these further investments in the other buildings. Our highway garage, our town offices is in dire need of some deferred maintenance. So I've been able to work with the Board of Selectmen to kind of encourage them to bolster those building maintenance budgets, working with the building supervisor to kind of identify the best use of those dollars. We're only talking $20,000. And this is all Chapter 149 public construction, so prevailing wage kind of moves these things really quickly. So our ability to do everything we want with very little, minimal reserves is a difficult thing. So we have to kind of look for the best value in preserving these buildings, especially if they're older, historic, or just delicate.
Right now in our capital projects, we have a lot of money out there right now.
Yeah.
Multiple items. I'm sure you've.
Yeah, you got a $25 million public safety complex coming up, and
we have a 40-ish, 45-ish million dollar wastewater treatment plant.
Right.
A library that needs to be done.
The library needs to be done.
Middle school, I think I saw, is in a feasibility study.
It's a high school project.
Yep.
In the $30 million range.
Sure.
So there's a lot of things we're balancing.
Mm-hmm.
Big money that's going to have to be bonded and dealt with for years and years to come. Mm-hmm. Do you have any kind of experience in this? This is real money.
Absolutely.
And how to finance this. We've been lucky. We've had a good town manager that
Mm-hmm.
led us along,
Yep.
and we have to continue on that path.
Yeah, so I often think of some of these jobs as like scalability questions. So obviously in Williamsburg, we're talking about a $5 million public safety complex, and that's kind of all in for OPM, engineers, architects, and so forth, construction. So we went through the traditional bonding process. So we did our ratings with Standard & Poor's, and we worked with our bond advisor to kind of issue those bonds. So I think I would feel comfortable executing that process at a larger scale. And then looking at where it differs in these small towns is they often kind of move to debt exclusion to kind of move the needle on their levy limits and so forth. So that has historically been the process they've opted for, in these larger capital needs. I'm thinking of, they went through an mass school building needs project with their Auntie Dunphy Elementary School. They had debt excluded that, some years ago. So I think there's about 7 years left on that 20-year issuance. The public safety complex has another 18 years on that debt issuance. But they had to go to debt exclusion because the levy capacity just isn't strong enough to bring that in, under the current. So as hard as they try. So again, I think it's kind of a scalability thing. I don't decline that there'll be a learning curve to some of these bigger projects, these bigger numbers over time, but I'm confident I'm capable to kind of work through the scalability problems here.
Good.
Yep, good.
Yeah, I think that was we were asking that for the absent members. Now you're back, Dave, at school committee.
Yeah, obviously Lenox has good schools.
Yeah, great.
I'm sure you've read that. But it accounts for about half of the budget, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
And sometimes that creates a little tension between the select board, the town, and the school committee. I'm wondering if you've run into that in the past and how you've dealt with it, and how you deal with the schools and your select board and the town.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really common thing everywhere. It's like when you start to look at these budgets, half to 55% are going to education, and the reality is those costs are expensive. We know that students with special needs need additional resources. Those costs just add up pretty quickly. They're often the highest users of utilities, both heat and electricity. Those rates don't go down very often. Building maintenance is critical to those things. And what I found, I think most importantly, because I think that conversation tends to originate with persons who might not have students in the school system, and they may wonder like, well, why am I paying all these taxes to fund this big school budget, and I don't see those benefits. I mean, at the end of the day, education is a public good, and you're serving your community by furthering the educational growth of your students. Like, these are just net benefits for the future. Like, it's a good investment, and I think if you can help people realize, like, yes, it is expensive, we get that, but we need teachers, classrooms are too big, we need paraprofessionals, they need those additional supports, and obviously student learning has just changed dramatically coming out of like the 2020, 2021, school year. Technology is so much more critical. I would venture to say that our high school experiences are just much different, comparatively than to today, but they don't get less expensive, but it's just a good investment in the community and sort of the long-term sort of, financial earning potential of students.
Thank you.
So, I'm sure you're familiar with setting the tax rate.
Yep.
We have a split tax rate here in Lenox.
Saw that.
Residential and commercial. We have a very small commercial zone. How would you think about that?
The idea of a split tax rate, or?
The idea of a split tax rate, balancing the needs of the commercial community versus the residential community, and have you had to make tough choices between raising taxes and cutting services? Have you had any of that experience?
Yeah, so Williamsburg is a single tax rate. Its commercial development is primarily limited to very small pockets of the Route 9 corridor. It's almost primarily residential. Your tax rate looks, granted, I think the value of buildings is a bit higher comparatively to, Williamsburg or Pittsfield in that sense, but the tax rate feels, at least on paper, it seems pretty manageable. So oftentimes in Pittsfield, we would get to setting the tax rate, and we'd look at the shift factor. So you'd have to compare those, things like, all right, if most of it's coming from the residential side, at what point does the shift factor like go too far in either direction? So there was a lot of tension to those things, and I think at the end of the day, it's like it was a fair process. And I don't know that we were saddling with those things. And as I kind of indicated before, Williamsburg hasn't had to deal with like layoffs. The 2.5 growth, it's just enough to outpace like cost of living adjustments, increases in utilities, and other sort of fixed costs, health insurance, and so forth like that. And a lot of times these positions, we talk about hypotheticals and what ifs. It's not until like they unfold that you have to take those inputs and you have to kind of measure the outcomes, weigh the alternatives, and kind of review your policy options. So, I can tell you what I've seen and done in the past, but looking at the future, it becomes a lot harder.
We're on bond financing now,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're, I think more than may, we are likely to rely on bond funding to finance major projects. Mm-hmm. Some of them may be exempt, some non-exempt, and it feels like you've addressed this quite a bit. How have you evaluated long-term impacts of those financing options on the financial health of the town?
Yeah, sure. I'll just kind of reiterate, Williamsburg was in a position where they needed to debt exclude those payments, so we're looking, our safety complex is roughly $260,000 over 20 years. That's been debt excluded, and that allows the capacity to just be enough to feel comfortable in that process. We had a school project that, again, that was debt excluded, and that seems to be a good method for those small towns because it doesn't sort of paint you into a corner because if you don't debt exclude that and your levy capacity shrinks like exponentially, then you're going to be forced into these cuts to already shoestring operations. So by all accounts, Lenox's financial health is very strong. You have several $1 million in levy capacity to work with. You could opt to debt exclude it. That may not be necessary. So it'd be working with the treasurer, the accountant, to see like what are their long terms. Can you refinance existing bonds? Can you get lower interest rates? That all kind of plays into an impact. The Federal Reserve is cutting rates. That might be a net benefit for the community as you look to these bigger projects. And do you want to restructure your previous debt? What's falling off the debt schedule? So these little things that I have obviously an understanding, but it wouldn't be until you came in to actually kind of see that on paper, especially working with the treasurer in that capacity.
So every town has this, it sneaks up on you sometime, a very unexpected financial crisis.
Sure.
A bridge could wash out or something. Have you ever had, I hate to say that,
Yeah.
our bridges are in pretty good shape.
Yeah, great.
We only got two.
Yeah, we only got two of them, they're both pretty good.
Yeah.
But, if some catastrophic thing would happen, have you had any experience of how to handle that situation, how to keep the town running, but still deal with this awful thing that's happened over here?
Yeah, so catastrophe is maybe subjective, and we haven't dealt with like major, like earth-shattering catastrophe in Williamsburg or Pittsfield for that matter at those times. So,
But even on a smaller scale, maybe not
Yeah.
that big, but on a smaller scale.
yeah, I think I think it's taking a step back first. Like, so you have this problem, okay? Like maybe a bridge goes out. So your first thoughts are like, okay, now we've got to reroute transportation. So obviously that's going to impact sort of daily commutes or the flow of traffic. There's an impact on public services or emergency services. Ambulances need to know that bridge isn't there, so they've got to go and seek alternate directions. Once you kind of work through like those little immediate nuances, we can take a step back. All right, is the bridge owned by MassDOT? Is it slated for, does it have a project number? How is the recent inspection report? And then you can start looking at sort of the next element. Engineering is so wildly expensive in these processes. Like you might just have to go to town meeting and say, we're going to need X tens of thousands of dollars to do this engineering. We want to replace this. We want to get this online. But I think communicating to the residents, like these can often be temporary, right? Like the intent is to fix it. The intent is to work with, in your example, sort of DPW, highway, we're gonna figure this out. It's gonna take some time. It might involve like the movement of resources, and in a town meeting government, it can be, it's a lot. You've got to call a special town meeting. You've got to get a quorum together. You may have to move existing funds. You may have to sort of appropriate more funds, depending on the schedule. If you've already set the tax rate, we can't just go raise the levy in that capacity. Fortunately, I don't know how Lenox has spent down their American Rescue Plan funds, but that has proven to be like a pretty interesting backstop. So while the Board of Selectmen had sort of dedicated those funds to certain areas, they were always receptive to like new needs. For instance, recently the fire department had their hose inspection, and nearly every foot of hose was deemed like inadequate, like doesn't pass inspection, and that's like an $10,000 cost. They didn't build that into their FY25 operating budget. So the board heard the concerns. We evaluated what the rescue plan funds were going to go for, and we kind of moved those around to meet that critical need immediately. And then unfortunately that just pushes things back, and that's what we're always doing, right? We're always kind of shuffling. We're always kind of saying what can go on the back burner for the time being, what needs to be on the front burner. That's part of just municipal management.
Good, that's a good realistic answer.
Yeah.
It is, and I snickered at your question, but we had that Edgewood washout.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we really had to move resources for that and work around it. So, yeah, we faced not catastrophic, but
Sure.
certainly inconvenient
Yeah.
issues with that. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, we were very briefly closing, East Street,
Yeah.
so they could park across the street.
Yeah, they were.
DOT is letting us do that, and,
That's right.
eventually the DOT, I won't see who paid a contractor to come in and work extra hours, and
Yeah.
I don't even know if people on the other side of town were aware,
True.
because we don't have, well, I mean, everyone's got to get to here, but people come from so far away. Many people don't touch a bridge, some people touch a bridge 4 times a day.
That's right.
Well, one last question, Nick.
Sure, yeah, it's okay.
So what was it about Lenox that made you want to apply?
Yeah, so I'm committed to a career in municipal government. I like the bureaucracy, I like the nuance, I like the data points. It's just weirdly interesting to me. So, if I'm looking at my long-term career objectives, right, a small town administrator is a first good step. And as I've kind of indicated, governments tend to operate on scalability problems. As your population goes up, your costs go up, your budgets go up. I think I have a good handle on that. And if I'm looking forward in my life, I need to be looking for opportunities of larger communities, more responsibility, different governmental operations. Lenox in the town manager position feel like sort of the ceiling of what my capacity in a career like this is. And this opportunity arose. So I applied. I was quite surprised even to get to the first round of interviews. And I was I said that to the search committee at the time. And then I was delighted to, be moved ahead to the 3 candidates here. And it kind of feels like a cherry on top. It's a little bit of all extra credit. So I'm going to take these opportunities as they arise, or at least make a pitch for them. But I'm going to continue to work, in the field of local government, whether it's at the administrative level, whether it's at the manager level, or whether it's something else that I'm not quite sure what it might be. But I'm committed to this field, and I'm going to look to grow in this capacity and make improvements, improve quality of life for residents, and hope to find my forever place eventually.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Say, does anyone else feel like we're 10 years ago?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a very good handle on, the challenges of local government, and, coming from
Thanks.
another Massachusetts community is a very positive thing. And I just wonder if there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah,
Let us know about.
I've got questions if we want to get to that part, or if there's anything
We
like
can
that.
certainly do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that it's obvious that it doesn't scare you.
What was that?
It doesn't scare you.
No.
You've seen it or tried it or had to do it, maybe on different scales, but, this doesn't seem over your head to me.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't doubt there's some learning curve. I get that, but I'll show up every day and I'll put my best foot forward in this process, and I'll work to understand the nuances and the facets of Lenox. Absolutely.
So the floor is yours. Ask us whatever you want.
Yeah, so I think obviously you can all answer or not answer, but I'd really like to hear how you characterize your relationship with the town manager, whether previous ones or a future one, from a board perspective.
Well, I think Ed and I are the only 2 that have worked under 2 town managers.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the second one was easier to work with than the first one. And we had an excellent working relationship with our former town manager. He was a small town, so obviously we got to know families, we got to know friends, and we had a very productive working relationship. His door was always open. He was an excellent communicator with the departments. So I think we had a great relationship. Did you characterize it?
I couldn't think of a better relationship with the town manager that we had there. It was, as he said, it's little town stuff, And we worked together. I'd come in not every day, but several days a week, and sorry, Chris, I'm going to talk to you for a minute. And an hour would go by, and we're still talking.
Yeah.
And I'd say, well, you got work to do, I gotta leave. And but that's the kind of thing it was. We were just friends.
Mm-hmm.
And professional,
Right.
but still friends.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of at least our board is we tend to distribute the leadership. So everybody's been the chairman.
Oh, you rotate every...
We rotate
okay.
every year.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's been the clerk, everybody's been the chairman.
Right.
And I think it's really important that everybody sits in that seat, because it is, the first line of communication is with your board chair.
Absolutely.
And it's really important that I think anybody who takes this job on understands, how important it is to have a really good communicative relationship with the town manager.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's as challenging for the board as it is for you, because you're learning about the personalities and, how best to communicate with each one of us to get your, the needs of the town across, and for us to help the board do their job. So we've had a good working relationship with the last, I've only been under the interim town manager, and the previous one.
Okay.
Mr. Ketchen.
Yeah.
But it's been a
Yes.
very good working relationship, and I think it's, I think you have stated really nicely, really well, that, you're kind of a wonky guy and you really enjoy this work. I think all of us enjoy this work too. So it's good, it's great when we're all pulling the oars in the same direction.
Absolutely.
To help the town. And I've heard that from you a lot today, and that really is very encouraging.
Yeah, I don't think we put our names on ballots if we don't want to get into the weeds and the wonkiness of those things.
I can certainly sympathize with that. I knew Chris before he was anything, ironically. I grew up here. Chris grew up in Elford. We had both done stuff. I ran an office in Boston, but my history and my family goes back to, before things were even Sprague. It's embarrassing to have forgotten that, generations have built things that don't even stand around here. So when I returned, I used to, I started out driving back and forth between Boston and Pittsfield constantly as my father got older and I was thrust into running the company. And then we moved. And so my first thought obviously was, well, the kids are going to feel uprooted. They're only 6 and 8.
Sure.
And Chris is younger than me. He hadn't, I don't think, had children at that point in time. But he and I both ended up on the, we were on the strategic planning committee for the school, just because we had both introduced ourselves to 3 or 4 superintendents ago. And then they said, why don't you be on the school committee? And I was like, all right. We haven't finished this. So then I was on the school committee. And then, I don't remember who, but one of our select board members, who I replaced, stepped down. He thought it was only going to be interim. So I was picked to replace him for about 4 months.
Okay.
And then I got elected.
All right.
And then fast forward to this year, I never got a post for anything until we all got a post.
Sure. Yeah.
First time I've ever made lawn signs.
Far out. Great. Yeah. Thanks. Question number 2 would be: are there any qualities in previous town managers that you felt were really important, and you might want to see replicated in a future town manager?
I think Chris's ability in financial management was, we have a AAA bond rating, which is very difficult to get.
That's great, yeah.
So I think we'd like to see somebody who could continue that, that vein. So, yeah, I think that's important, don't you?
Absolutely, that's number one.
That-
And bringing up all the projects, that's the most critical thing that we're facing coming up here in the next 5 to 10 years, is we're gonna need to manage that process. And we need somebody who's really got finances in their headlights.
Having a great respect for each other, the select board and town manager, but having complete communication. And we have kind of a unique situation here. Each member takes on a liaison assignment,
Right.
be fire department, DPW, whatever. And Chris was particularly good about keeping us in the loop about everything that was happening.
Right. Yeah.
And that goes a long way. There was no secrets, no wondering. It was all working as a team, and teamwork really paid off.
But it's equally important for Chris was, gonna go, to bat no matter what. The transparency issue, as hard as we do it, we support it and everything, and he never closed his door to us. But I think there's some people that would maybe say, well, maybe Chris is doing more behind the scenes than we realize
Right.
to make us look good. So we're not looking to, it's a very tough balancing act.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we don't want you to like not have a life.
Sure. Can I ask one, how would you rate or characterize the finance committee in Lenox? Like, are they really hands-on? Are they pretty critical, and they're elected
Yeah,
too?
they're not elected.
They're not elected.
They're appointed by
Okay.
the moderator.
Oh, okay, right.
We have a very active finance committee. They're very engaged. Each one of them sort of has a couple of issue areas that they focus in on, and I'm sure yours does the same as well.
Right.
But they're very communicative with the town manager.
Oh, great.
And,
Yeah.
You're welcome to go to all of their committee meetings. And they do a really good job as an advisory body to us.
Yeah, I'm just curious how
Yeah.
that unfolds for you guys. So maybe the last question might be, are there any metrics, either qualitative or quantitative, that this board might look to the manager as points of success, in this job?
That's a difficult question. I mean, I look at the town as being a success, and I'd like to see that continue. You have a select board that supports the town manager. You have a select board that supports each other, as the chairman has already pointed out. We don't always agree, but we disagree very respectfully if we do disagree.
Right.
As opposed to some towns in the county. We don't kick the can down the road. If we see a problem, we identify it and plan for it, so that's transparent. Everybody in town should know about it, because Berkshire Eagle reports on our meetings and what we've discussed. So I think the success is the transparency, the support that we each give each other, and we give the town manager, and vice versa, the town manager gives us. There are no secret meetings.
That's good. The Attorney General thanks you.
Three of us are together, we're discussing baseball.
That's fair.
So,
Yeah, we had our master plan approved in like 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's great.
And we really look to that. We try to sit down with that every year at some point and just kind of go through, the 12 different areas and, see how we're attacking the short, medium, and long-term issues. I've been anxious to sort of reconvene that committee.
Sure.
Just to get us together to kind of really drill down and see what we've accomplished, because I think we've ticked off
Oh, great.
a lot of short-term issues.
Yeah.
And I know we're drilling down into a lot of medium and long-term issues, but I think that document should be used very proactively. And I think we've done an okay job of that, but I think there's always room for improvement, and it's a good roadmap for the town.
Absolutely.
That we try to use along with our municipal vulnerability plan and everything else. So.
I think that filters down to our charter review. I mean,
yep.
we simply, to make it possible to not have a mandatory live in Lenox from the start and open residency, on the one hand, people are like, well, why can't you review the whole thing and take out all the old-fashioned he references and make them gender neutral? And we're like, yeah, we're trying. I think Smitty told us multiple times that, some of the stuff, we got to get it in to be approved, so we can't make it too broad. And then we were like, okay, we're going to just do this. And then at the end of the day, some of the stuff we weren't even allowed to change until we have a charter review. So I think we changed all of 2 words.
Yeah, 2 words, exactly. Everything gets complicated, and I don't have to tell you that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Are you talking about the Town Manager Act or
Yeah.
like that? Okay, yeah, okay.
From 91.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And that,
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I might ask, but it was kind of alluded to, is is there anything coming up in the next year to 2 that you feel like is the spotlight issue for the town of Lenox? I mean, obviously you're involved in the rest of the river cleanup and so forth.
Yeah.
We purposely don't have a rest of river question because I'd be walking out of the room to recuse myself for everybody.
Yeah, okay, no, I so past that, obviously, but I'm just curious if there's other things that are happening here.
Our wastewater treatment plant,
Yeah.
a library pending library renovation, a potential school building project. You know, we've got some pretty big nuts that we're going to need to fund.
Right.
So that's really what we're looking for, is some good, strong strategic financial management here, which is helping us navigate that.
Okay.
That's what we need now. We're on a good plan.
Yeah.
You know, we're gonna have our fire safety, EMS, all that up to snuff.
Right.
They're very well funded. They have basically everything they need. DPW is in just great shape as far as we fund our departments.
Right.
We're gonna have a new wastewater treatment plant in the future, which is gonna be a huge management thing for you, but also for paying for it.
Right.
So that comes into play. We have a it's a realistic school building project that's going to have to get done. And as Mary Beth never lets me forget, a library that needs to be taken care of. So that's our historical things. The others are the basic things that make a town the best town it can be.
Sure.
We're on that path. We just have to be able to live with it without killing our taxpayers.
Right.
And, see the jobs through.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's the usual questions I ask, so I appreciate you responding to those.
Sure.
Anything else on your?
Good interview.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity. If you guys need anything, feel free to reach out. I've been in communication with Lindsay, HR person, so I think.
Smitty might have something that, paper. Just one
sure.
little, housekeeping thing he has to talk to you about.
No problem, yeah. Well, if there's nothing else, I appreciate the time, appreciate the opportunity, and
Okay, Nick.
Thanks for coming in.
I'll
Really
stay tuned.
appreciate your candor. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Nice to meet you.
You bet.
Be safe out there.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Thanks.
You bet. Have a good election.
You're most likely aware that two of you could come today. One, from scheduling purposes, couldn't come. We don't open on Sundays, so they're coming Monday night. So we're not going to deliberate amongst ourselves until we've given everybody their interview. And, I think the basic thing is to make sure you're comfortable, and then we'll ask questions. We can either.
I'm ready. If you're
Sounds
ready.
great.
Okay, I'm ready.
Good way, Dave.
Okay. Who's going first? Who has the first question?
We got a list. It changed a little bit when Max didn't show up, so.
You can choose if you like, but I'll start off talking a little bit about financial experience of finance. I'm sure you've had some budgetary challenges over the years in your positions, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about those and how you overcame them.
So budgetary challenges are not unique. You face them every year. So what I usually do with budgetary challenges, anytime you see something like that, it's usually via the conversation as we present the budget. And so what we'll state is, okay, this year we're looking to increase a certain department line. I meet with the department heads beforehand, and we have that dialogue. And we decide which is the items or the important things we want to bring forward, and that becomes part of our budget process and our guides of our budgeting for that particular year. So we'll go to the council, say this year we decided as a team that we want to hire a deputy DPW director, and I did this one particular community. We want a new DPW director. It's important that we have this position. And we presented it. One of the council members said to the building inspector, said, so you're kind of short-staffed, you could use some more staff, couldn't you, in your office? He said, absolutely. And the councilman said, well, we got this DPW director, don't you think you might know to hire, the assistant that you need? And he said to the council, he says, no, we as an administrative team decided that we need a DPW director. And the DPW director will not only help the DPW department, but also my department in this way and that way and that way. So what I find is I work with my administrative team to decide what is the best, what do we need to bring forward that's going to benefit the community that current fiscal year. And then through conversations with the councils, we discuss what that item is or those items are. At the same time, there's sometimes when you have to make those difficult decisions and making cuts. You have that dialogue, you have that conversation, and you just proceed. A lot of times I do with budget is set the foundation like the year before. If I was going to add something to a budget, I start the conversation the year before and saying, you won't see this year, but I'm letting you know next year we're looking to do this. It's important that we do that. A budget document on a year-to-year basis is nothing more than a plan. It's little more than a planning document. Your capital budget is nothing more than a planning document. You're planning for the infrastructure and what's going on in your community in the next 5 to 7 years. 1 year, operating budget's a little different, but it also can be the same planning document. You start that conversation and you move forward with it and set the goals community-wide with the council and with the administrators. They know what their departments are, they know what they need.
Thank you. So I'm sure you've done some research on Lenox and so forth. How would you characterize our financial position, potential to free cash and reserves?
I think you're in good financial position. You've got a $35.4 million budget with $17 million going to the school. That's pretty much the norm, which you see everywhere. You can see your community is somewhat of a wealthy community here, based on what I can see out there, what I can see what the median home prices are here. I don't think you're facing the same economic, social things that other communities in this state are faced. With that said, I'm sure you're still struggling with some other things that other communities are. I'm sure you would love to see your staff be able to live in this community. The housing, affordable housing here, they can't do that. In the last 2 communities I worked with, it's the same thing. The difference, like in Block Island, what we are faced with right now is affordable housing, and in order to get to the island is 13 miles off the coast of Rhode Island. You only can get there by ferry, or you can fly. So we're in the same situation. The median house on Block Island right now is just slightly under $1 million. So your workers can't get there. It's a tourism community, it's a service community, and how do those people afford to live there? What we've done as a community, we being the community, has built town employees' housing. I am living in a town manager's house that was built by the town. Next door to my house, we have 4 additional units that are being constructed now. That'll probably be done by the 1st of January. And we have a hierarchy, first going to police officers, second general employees, and the third going to the general public. So that's something, I'd rather see the employees live in the community because they're vested in the community, and a lot of them want to live here. They want to educate their kids here, they want to send their children here. So I think although you're financially stable, you have some of the similar challenges that any other community has, especially when you have the affordable housing. You want a heterogeneous population living in your community. It's so important to have a heterogeneous population.
Thank you.
Could I just follow up a little bit?
Absolutely.
And the thing I want to ask is, this came up when we were changing our Town Manager Act for residency requirement, and you indicated you have a town manager's house and a house for,
Yep.
right there.
Correct.
How does that work?
They built it. The town built it. They floated a bond. What they did was they authorized the voters and they floated a bond issue. There's a piece of property, and we have what's called accessory dwelling units. We have this, we call it the 513 zoning, which allows us to build up to 5 units on a piece of property. There has to be some size restrictions and stuff like that. So the town manager's house is the main house. And then there's 4 other units that we've currently constructed. So they asked the voters to authorize a bond to build the units, and they did. The town manager's house was built first. They charged the town manager rent to live there, and we're going to do it the same thing with the other ones. The 4 units that we're putting in place will also charge for rent. The rent isn't astronomical, but it's close to market.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and it's worked well. All buildings in Black Island that we're looking to build in the future, we're looking to build a new highway, a fire barn, and also a highway facility, but a fire barn. And what we're including in all construction is employee housing, or housing for folks who are year-round residents.
That's great. That's amazing.
Just as a follow-up to that, sorry.
No, it's fine. Fine, go ahead.
We have, we're a very popular tourist community as well. but we don't, like some, towns around us dwindle to only 30 or 20% local content when it's off-season. So, I mean, in addition to senior residents who are living in senior housing who are here full-time, we also have a lot of people that grew up here and work here. So I could just about always say that when we are at town meeting, it's a greater percentage of people that are living here full-time voting. Do you think, with Rhode Island being even more affluent than us, when you have those town meetings, do you have a sense, do the people who don't live there at all off-season come back to vote, or are they not there to vote?
The only, at our financial town meetings, the only folks that are allowed to vote are those that are registered voters. If you're a non-registered voter, you're allowed to attend and participate. You cannot vote. So the only ones that are voting are those that are residents.
That makes sense.
That's the same as us.
Yeah, same as
Right.
us. So, Maryanne, probably just like North Shoreham, our Lenox residents are highly engaged in local government, and we hear from them quite a bit. How do you manage constituent concerns? I see that you have held open houses and
Yeah.
coffee hours and things like
Yeah.
that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So what we do, I was doing a quarterly coffee hour. What's really interesting, I didn't get many to participate, which was interesting, and someone suggested that I do a night one. I said, that makes sense. So it's a coffee hour, I buy some coffee and some little treats, and like the little treats you just showed me. And they come in and we chit chat. And one time someone came in and started talking to me about the school budget. Well, the school budget, as the chair of the search committee said to me, is there a firewall with you in your school? And I'm like, what's a firewall? And it is, there is a firewall. But I knew the budget well enough where I can answer most of the questions. I said something, then she had a specific question about transportation and daughter's transportation with the bus. I said, you need to call the superintendent, I can answer that. But it's very informal. And we just sit down and chit-chat about what's going on. And what's interesting, there was one gentleman I consistently got, was an elderly gentleman that was starting to experience some dementia. And he just liked to come and just sit there and chit-chat about the weather and stuff like that. I always have an open door policy. My door's always open. People can come in. I like to walk a lot, so I'm always walking around the island and stopping and chatting. I also, although I don't have any children in the school in Block Island, I do go and watch their sporting events. The school is right across the street from my house, so there's our girls volleyball have made it to the state championship a couple of times. So I just walk across the street and go and see them and visit and watch them play. So I'm out and about. I like to be out and about.
I've got a follow-up to that. I see that you guys were able to get a co-op owned by residents, your electric, you have one of the first offshore wind farms.
Right, yep.
And it's turned into an off-the-grid residential co-op.
Mm-hmm.
How did you deal with the public in negotiating that?
So the bulk of that took place before I was hired.
Okay.
So what the town had did at that point is they proceeded to purchase the shares. There were 3 shareholders of the electric company. The electric company was privately owned.
Okay.
So they proceeded to work that through and purchase from the 3 shareholders. And now it's a it's a owner, resident owner-owned co-op. The electric company is owned by the residents, or the ratepayers, and there's a 5-member board that is elected from the general public, and it's really working really well. It really is. Our rates have dropped substantially because of that. So it was really an interesting situation how they went about doing it. And again, they floated the bond issues to go through the purchasing of it.
Thanks. Great.
Oh, well, I'm going to talk about the select board. This is for everybody except the one guy who can't make it. We rotate roles every year automatically. We've all taken at least a couple of turns being chair, being, treasurer, being clerk. And so a lot of us have done a lot of this. Some of us, because we've been, fixtures in town, some of us because they're very experienced in politics, some of us sort of got nominated to fill a vacant position and then it turned into a permanent position. Nonetheless, we're very first name basis. We don't secretly meet. We try to make sure that all our department heads include all of us, not just one of us. And, we're trying to be as transparent as possible, despite a lot of fluctuations, even in staff, including our schools and everything else. So, how would you work with this?
So the board is a policy-making organization. You're the one that make the policy, and myself and staff are the one that implement the policy. I try to keep the selectmen informed at all times. But as someone has told me about a couple of years ago, and I was a captain in the state police in Rhode Island, when we had a situation on 4th of July weekend when kids were trying to get to a beach where they could drink, and we secured the area, and then they were going around, figured out how to go around in the back way, and we found
kids.
then we found what they were doing, they were using yik-yak. And because I was watching them, I said to the captain of the police, I said, they're on the phone, what are they doing? He said, they're on yik-yak and they're going around. And so I said to the captain, I said, we gotta get people to this. He said, Maryanne, I'm telling you right now, we cannot outrun social media. And we can't outrun social media. Well, let me use a simple example. DPW truck is in a minor fender bender right here, right in front here, right outside your town manager's office. There's a good possibility you're gonna find out before that poor DPW director can even call it in that there was a fender bender due to social media texting and stuff like that. So we try to corral that. And what I've told my selectmen and my council, I don't like surprises. And I'm sure you don't like surprises. So if you hear something on the street, pick up the phone and say, town manager, this is what I just heard. I had one council president would do that. He called me, said, this is what I heard, what's going on? I said, David, his name was David. I said, let me get the other side of the story first. And I get the other side, I call him, and I tell him the other side. So sometimes there's two sides to every story. Finally, after a couple of times with that particular council president, he called, he said, okay, I want the other side, but let me tell you what I'm hearing. So a lot of it's strictly communication. And it's tough. It's tough in this day and age. It's tough because of social media. It's tough because people can text. You're going to hear things before I do. You're going to hear things before your town manager does. And the key is communication. If there is something happening, if there's an event, I usually email. If you folks do text, I text you saying, by the way, there's a water main break on Main Street. Just an FYI, we're on top of it. There's a major accident. No injuries, it's being taken care of, handled by the police department. So that's how I handle it.
We handle it different ways.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here without my phone on purpose.
No, we've tended to have a great relationship between town manager and select board members. We have an active select board. I don't know how you're set up with a council or whatever, but this is more than an open door policy here. We just can come in and BS for an hour if you want to. And the town manager has always been open to that. And I'm just making a statement, not a question, but it tends to work very, very well with the communication between everybody to come up with a plan or just hash things out, as they say.
Yeah, I have one council member who stops in and visits with me every afternoon. And when she does it, she's an older woman who lives by herself. I check around and make sure someone has...
Everything's okay. Yeah. That's great.
Okay, so move on to the next question. We've already kind of answered this, really. But in Lenox, like all other towns, we have many different departments. Sometimes have to do more with less. And but it's got to be one team. The whole team of all the departments working together. Could you describe, it says, could you describe a specific instance where your leadership improved departmental coordination? I know in the first question, you alluded to that. Do you want to expand on that at all?
I can give you another example recently with technology in the community that I have in New Shore. I've been there about 6 months, and my administrative assistant was off island, and she said, "Can you go in the server room and take out the tape?" And I looked at it, and I said to her, "What?" I said, "All right." So I went in the server room, and I couldn't find what she was talking about, and I was kind of distracted, so I FaceTimed her, and I'm like, "Here I am. What are you talking about? Take out the tape." And finally, I was moving the phone. She said, "Stop right there." I said, "All right, see that button? Push that button." I said, "Push that button," and a cassette tape came out. And I said, "What is this?" She said, "Put it in the little white thing." I said, "What white thing?" And she told me where it was. I found it. They were still backing up to cassette tapes. Not only for the town, but also at the police department, they were doing the same thing. And I said to him, I said, "What are we doing with the police department with this cassette tape?" She said, "Well, don't worry, they're all trained, the dispatchers have all been trained that if there's a fire or something like that, they'll pick up the cassette tapes and run out." So at that point, I said, "All right, I gotta stop, I gotta see where we are with technology." So at that point, I did put out, we had a company that was servicing us for technology. We went out to bid, we put an RFQ out, I hired someone else, and we upgraded the complete technology. We went to the cloud. We then got a list of everyone's device. Most of them were no longer supported. The software was no longer supported. You know, the Microsoft Word and stuff was no longer supported. So over a 2-year period of time, we upgraded it, and then we put people on a cycle. When I realized this was going on, I would walk in and start to notice people say, "God, my computer, it's taking so long, it's this, that, and the other thing." And we realized that everything was outdated. So what we did was we upgraded the whole technology system. Not only the backup, the devices, the hardware, we got behind the walls, we got into the access points for Wi-Fi, all that stuff had to be upgraded and replaced. Staff loved it. Staff loved it because at that point, once we got that done, then we could implement some software packages that would allow us to accelerate and some of our things that we were doing more by hand and paper, like building permits and stuff like that. So we no longer had to rely on a paper process. And it was cross-department, so then it allowed communication between cross-departments, which was great, and they loved it.
So the next question I have is our infrastructure and repairs. We have a lot going on as far as infrastructure repairs now. Are you familiar with I'll just explain what we're really doing. We're just finishing up we're halfway through a public safety building, a $25 million project. We're facing in the planning stages of a $45 million wastewater treatment plant upgrade. We spend $1 million on just paving every year. And whenever a major water department needs a new line in a road, we're doing a lot of work around here. And also we have historic structures that continually need a lot of work. And that would fall on your plate to coordinate pretty much all this work. You do have help. We have a permanent building committee that helps with a lot of it. And our DPW, and we've got some skilled talent around town. But still, bottom line is it's yours. What kind of projects like that have you handled in the past?
So we just went out to bid for, New Shore just went out to bid for $1 million paving project, road paving. What we do is we cycle through every 3 to 4 years through bond issue, through authorization for $1 million paving. And what we do is we usually marry that when the state's over doing their project or someone else is doing a major project, so we can piggyback the bid process with that, so we can get the good, decent price because of the fact you have to come from the mainland to the island. We had a $10.4 million project that I was in the middle of for a school improvement project. The bids came in much higher than we had anticipated. So at that point, the discussion, it was a building committee that I was actively on. We decided to do the work that we needed to do. It was more the gymnasium was leaking like a sieve. And then we had some HAVC work we needed to do. And I started speaking with the first warden and also who's the council president and the chair of the school committee, and said, this school really needs a lot of work. So what we decided to do is put that project on pause and move forward with a community discussion about the building and renovating of the school. It'll be probably $34 to $35 million project. And when I was in East Greenwich, we built a new middle school, so I was actively involved with the new middle school. Rhode Island a lot, and then in South Kingston I was involved also with school projects, major construction school projects.
How did it work with the school projects? We're not in the early stages, we're in the planning stages of doing a school project, probably a $30 million price tag, which has already gone up significantly from what we had planned. And there's a couple of add-ons, it's one building part and then a couple of add-ons. And the best intel we're getting is you never want to defer these things because we're looking at construction costs of more than 6% going up every year. So you really never catch up. Did it work okay, or is the school project finished there, or is it still?
So what's fortunate in Rhode Island is that the state reimburses us. It depends on the community that you're in, and it's based on the economics of the community. Most communities get a 35% reimbursement on the principal and the bond issue, principal and interest payments on the bond. With the state of Rhode Island, they also, the state has floated $250 million bond issue, and it has encouraged all communities to really address their infrastructures with the school. Like everywhere else, we've let them all go. They're 1950s, 1930s vintage, and they needed to be upgraded. They also offered some incentives of consolidation, safety, and also preschool education curriculum. So many communities took advantage of that, and some of the incentives got them up to about a 50% reimbursement. So if they have a $40 million project, technically they're only paying $20 million. And the payment is paid over the life of the bond. So if your bond, principal and bond interest payment is, let's say, $2 million, the state reimburses you in state aid in the form of $1 million. So you budget the $2 million actual expense and $1 million state aid reimbursement.
Can I chime in?
Yeah, please.
So that makes good sense, and I understand what the state intends to do. Our soon-to-be retired after 20 years representative and our soon-to-hope replacement representative.
So you're running for state office.
Okay, so we're not talking agendas, but one of the things that everybody who sits in a seat out here in an elected position in Berkshire County is like, hey, Boston, please, we see all this money. You're spending $2 billion to upgrade a T that you upgraded 3 times since we last saw any money from you guys to support us out here. And we have more road miles per capita than the entire state in our county. So we hear about state, about the, and I had this discussion with our former town manager before he was town manager. We were just, the first time we were ever beer together, I said, I know you don't always have special town meetings in November, but if you did, even the little bit of Chapter 90 money that you know about, you could put that out to bid before the contractors here are already booked for next summer. And we do that every year. Some people still are like, why do we have a fall meeting?
Right.
And a lot of stuff gets piled onto it now. But that was the origination of making fall meetings consistent, is just to give the superintendent an earlier heads up so he could bid when contractors weren't already telling us. And a follow-on is, we're pretty diverse for a rural town, but, and I get that this is probably unchangeable because the federal government tells the states what to do, but, DOT is telling some projects, you gotta have 15% minority company ownership. I gotta be honest with you, as a former contractor, or almost former contractor, I'm always hiring people from Worcester to come out here. It's more expensive than if they lived here.
Same thing, WBE, yeah. It's the law.
And I guess that was just a statement. It's just, we know what's available. I mean, USDA is helping us on stuff. But the infrastructure stuff is, we paved everything because it was, the shovel-ready era, like they couldn't design it in Boston, so they just had everybody pave roads that practically didn't need paving. And I guess it's still just a statement. I'm trying to say.
You're getting in deeper and deeper here, yeah.
I'll finish.
Okay.
So, we were talking about schools a little bit. You mentioned it. And you quoted our school budget for us, but so it's a little over 50% of what we do, but the town's responsible for raising that money. And we have great public schools, and of course the school committee's asking for more. It's a tightrope between the town and the school committee. How do you walk that tightrope?
So how I walk that tightrope is spending time with the superintendent. Superintendent and town manager need to work together. And they need to understand each other's issues, concerns. So I have an excellent working relationship with the superintendent in Block Island. He just left, there's a new one. I have an excellent working relationship. We chat all the time. They look to me for advice because I worked on the school side for so many years. I know a lot about school construction. So that's how you do that. I have no problem saying to a superintendent, listen, and I think you need to have these meetings. In Rhode Island, we have this, what we call a meeting in December where we get together with the school committee. At that point is when we need to tell them, like, okay, under Rhode Island general laws, we can only raise the budget 4% of the tax levy. That's Rhode Island general laws. There are some exceptions that you can do it. And we say, you folks need to come in at a 2% increase or 3%, whatever the percentage increase. So if they know ahead of time, they're budgeting to that. So, and I just find working, it doesn't have to be an adversarial relationship. You just work with them. And I have no problem meeting with the superintendent, going out for coffee periodically and just catching up on what's going on.
That works for you. Good.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with your resume and the fact that you've got over 20 years of experience in HR, all the school building projects, school risk management, workers' comp liability, renovating 6 schools in Rhode Island. That you certainly have a fantastic handle on the school end of things, and that would be a real boon. That's terrific. Impact on the tax rate. Property taxes are, a significant concern for everybody. We have a split tax rate here in Lenox. We have a residential tax rate and a commercial tax rate. We have a small commercial tax situation there. Describe where you've had to make some tough choices with raising taxes or cutting services, and I'd also like to hear a little bit about the residential exemption that you guys instituted in
The Homestead?
that Homestead Act.
Yeah. So the homestead, what we did with the homestead, it was because we had raised taxes, like I said, there's a cap of 4%. We decided we wanted to come up with a way to find relief for some of the residents, especially those that are year-round. So we implemented this year very quickly a homestead exemption. It was very focused, and we're looking to expand on that a little bit going forward. And it was mainly to give, the council voted to do 20%. I was thinking the finance director and I were more along the line of 10 to 15%, but they voted for 20%, which is fine. What that does is, granted, if you give a homestead exemption, you got to reshuffle the pie. The pie is the same pie, so you're just going to reshuffle the pie. So what we end up doing, reshuffling the pie a little bit. Because a lot of our year-round residents aren't the ones that are in the significantly assessed value homes. Those are the ones that are your seasonal people that are coming out for the season. So that's what that homestead exemption was. It was to give some property tax relief. And it was interesting, a couple of people got their tax bills and came running into the town hall and said, thank you for doing that. Even though they knew it was coming, it wasn't until they actually saw the impact on their tax bill that they were pleased to see that.
And how did the second homeowners feel?
They were fine. They were fine. We have heard no noise. No noise. Which is interesting.
Yeah,
Because
very
I said, because like I said, the pie's the same
Right.
pie, so you
Right.
got to reshuffle that pie.
Because the taxes are going to continue to go up and you have to provide the
Right.
same services year over year.
Right.
And I know that there's the potential for, people to feel like, well, you're taking money and redistributing it
Yeah.
essentially. But that's interesting to hear that you did not get a lot of pushback.
We did not. We did not.
And again, you mentioned that, the people who vote at town meeting are the people who are the year-round residents. And so, you wouldn't necessarily hear that at town meeting, but I was just wondering if you'd heard anything.
Nothing.
Okay,
Nothing.
interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, so we, pardon me. Bond financing, we are in a great position, AAA bond rating. We are capable of bonding. We're not up against a levy impact, but there's still occasions when we might want to exempt or not exempt bonds. Have you had any experience having to do that, or?
I'm mainly floating bond, yeah. I've worked with the rating agencies and stuff like that to put bonds out on the market and see what happens. So.
What is the bond rating of the?
We're AA one. And we don't have the opportunity to get any higher, which we're not surprised because of the fact of the limitations of the island.
The what?
The limitations of the island.
Oh, I see, okay.
Because there's limited opportunity for commercial growth and stuff like that.
Okay.
It's mainly tourism that you see. You don't have, you won't see an opportunity either, because we're 13 miles off the coast of the island. Even if in a neighboring community, you may have a big, like an Amazon move in, which could eventually sprinkle to a neighboring community, we will never have an Amazon move in. So we will not
Makes
be able
perfect
to.
sense.
Yeah, so our bond ratings is as high as it will go, and we're not surprised by that, and we're comfortable with it.
So every town at some point faces an unexpected, let's say catastrophic, but big structural or some kind of something that falls apart and has to be dealt with. And at the same time, you have to maintain all the services you have, fire, police, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Have you ever, unfortunately, been ever faced with any kind of a crisis like that? And how'd you handle it?
So the one crisis, if I think this is what you're asking, happened when I was the town manager in Block Island. I'm sorry, in Jamestown. Jamestown, again, is also an island, but it's connected by two bridges. Newport, Rhode Island's on one side, and North Kingston, Rhode Island's on the other side. And there's two bridges, one on the east side and one on the west side. And when electric deregulation came in place, we had a generator on the island with, it was near Narragansett Electric, it was a small electric company. And so deregulation came in and there was buyouts and stuff like that, and the generator went. And the council asked me, are we okay with that generator leaving? And I said, well, I talked to the new company, the big parent company, and we had two cables that, we had the primary cable, it was on the East Passage, and both were coming into the island from two different areas. And they said the chances of both those cables ever failing is highly unlikely. So we're fine. Well, 6 weeks later, oh, you know about this?
No, we're just laughing at him.
6 weeks later, it was a Sunday night, and we just got through watching the Disney Channel, and I went like this with my eyes. It was about 8:30. I said, I'm tired, and I opened my eyes. It was pitch black. So the power went out. And sometimes, with wind and stuff, the power goes out, but it hadn't been windy or anything like that. I said, something's really weird in the area. I said to my husband about this situation. And finally, we're trying to figure out, and finally, I get a call. I finally get a call, and of course, the landlines are also out. So I finally get the call, and I get it on the cell phone. And it's the sergeant from the police department, and he says, cruise liner had just left Newport and didn't get its anchor up in time and got both cables and snapped them. I won't repeat what I said at that point. And at that point, I said, all right. So I jumped in my car, went down to the police station. We completely, quickly pulled together our emergency management team. You drill for this all the time, for these types of things, but it's mostly hurricanes and stuff like that. So of course, nobody was prepared. Half the island's on water as well, so they couldn't flush the toilets or anything like that. So at this point, what we started doing, the emergency management director was a volunteer. And we kept calling his house, but it was the landline. So finally, we had police officers at 10 o'clock knocking on his door. His wife nearly had a heart attack. So we got the team all together, and then we started reaching out. We reached out to our state officials to let them know. We reached out to our solicitor to have him come down because we were going to declare a state of emergency. And when you declare a state of emergency, it's almost like paramilitary, which gives the town manager some opportunities to make decisions without the council, although I wouldn't do that. But it just changes things. So we did declare the state of emergency. We did reach out to the parent electric company at that point. They came down, everyone came down. And we had big news release, and National Guard came in. And what they did was, which was really amazing, they took one cable and this cable, and they spliced the two of them together. I'm in a public meeting where they're saying to do this, and I'm just shaking my head. This is never going to work. And they did it. And that's how we lived for electricity for about 6 weeks. But then they had to repair both cables. What I've learned from that, when you go through all those drills or planning and stuff like that, when it comes time to implement it, we weren't prepared. It wasn't like the storm was coming, nothing like that. It just happened. You realize that yourself and your department head know what they need to do, and they did. We had police officers knocking on doors, walking in the streets. We had folks checking on the elderly. We had a list of folks, if there was a hurricane, of those that need, if they need for oxygen, they need electricity and stuff like that. So we had all that information, and it just went into place, and we called upstate, we declared the state of emergency, and the governor sent the National Guard General down to help us with it. So it was an interesting event, but it told me a lot.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay. So what was it about Lenox that made you want to apply for this position?
Lenox reminds me of the last two communities I've served in. They're small communities, rely heavily on tourism. I like the communities. I like what I see here when I've walked around a few times. So it's a budget that I'm used to working with, strong schools, so that's why.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good. It was a good interview.
Yeah.
I think we learned a lot.
We did.
But it's nice to get a different perspective.
Yeah.
We're used to little old Berkshire County, but here's,
Did you ever bring the generator back?
Well, oh my God. So, thank God, there was a gentleman who lived on the island. Oh, I can't remember the company he worked for. And he had kids my kid's age, and so he was like a peer. He was banging on the door of the police department and said, I work for this company, I'll get you. And he did. He ended up getting us a generator. He got us a generator. But what they did once, they spliced it. Within 24 hours, they spliced it, and the power started coming back.
Excellent.
We were so, whenever, and it was so funny. What was really funny was I went home to get clothes because they were going to do this big press release, and it was June, so I found, just took clothes out of the closet and was hoping that everything matched, and I ended up, it was a red suit with the blouse, and the boat that had come across and pulled it was called the Big Red Boat. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And it was amazing. Like I said, when they told me they were going to splice it, I just shook my head. But also the fact that it was deregulation and it was a major company that bought the small thing out, the smaller company would not have been able to do what that company was able to do because they were able to get the folks and fly them in to repair the cable on a short-term and long-term basis.
Crazy.
Good.
Great.
So do you have any questions for us?
Just timeline a little bit as the next steps with you folks. I know you said you have another interview on Monday, and so we
Yeah, we
didn't
do.
think you're doing from there.
Well, we want to move as quickly as possible, right, Mr. Chairman?
We certainly do.
Yes.
We have now unintentionally, well, I mean, for valid reasons, but because we posted it, we've conducted 2/3 of the interviews without our fifth member. Fingers crossed Monday night works for him, which is what we've committed to. And then I think we want to move as quickly as possible. We do not know at this point if we're going to, I'm certain we're not going to decide the very next meeting we have. But we're going to find a way to deliberate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if in any way possible, even if it's a non-negotiated contract, to just bring on a consultancy basis or something, right?
Yeah, we want to get the ball rolling as quickly as we can, but we don't want to rush things either.
Right.
You know, we're cautious.
So your decision is still a couple of weeks out?
I would bet sooner than that,
Yeah,
but
probably about a week.
That would be the outside.
I don't know, yeah,
I would guess that too.
okay. Outside, what you said.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank
on a
you.
Saturday.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, appreciate it.
It's good to meet you.
Same here.
I'll start by welcoming everyone who's watching and who will probably see this again to a continuation from the process that we began at 9 o'clock on Saturday. We had a break and then we reconvened for a 10:30 interview. We had a break. Just to be very impartial, I only have your information and then the same questions that we asked. Max was not able to participate on Saturday at all because of short staffing in his job. So he knows at least the questions that we asked on his behalf and we'll be asking him, but he hasn't had a chance because they're not released yet to review the interviews with the other candidates. So I'll start with that. Nice to meet you. I'm Neil Maximilian. Ed to my left, Dave, Mary Beth, and Max.
Nice to meet you. Pleasure.
And we appreciate the screening committee. They did a fantastic job of as unbiased as possible because we couldn't participate in that in any way of finding candidates. Check my numbers. They got way more than they did when we just changed a couple of words in the 1991 Act, which is the Town Manager Act to us. They called in or said 6 people were through to interviews with them. They were able to conduct, I think, 4 in person, 1 by Zoom, and 1 did not respond, so that person's not in consideration. So we're down to 3, still excellent choices. So with that, Dave, you asked the first question the last time?
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you, Dave.
Let's see. Well, I asked the other folks, and I'll ask you pretty much the same thing, that budgetary issues as a town manager are extremely important, and you face a lot of challenges. So if you could just give us a minute or 2 brief answer on the challenges you faced and how you handled it, and how you involved the community in those challenges.
The budgetary process in Adams was, it was a challenge just in and of itself due to lack of new growth, as I said in my cover letter. So we had to really be careful in what we chose to spend on, which is always difficult for a community because everybody wants all the public services. Not everybody understands the cost of them. So we took a very tactical approach every year that I worked on a budget. When I started, we had a very good town accountant. I really learned the town finance from her. Her name was Mary Beverly. And we used the same process, and it worked very thoroughly, which was we would look at what we really needed to spend, and we had set priorities through other town processes that we had had. And it was a conservative approach. We didn't just decide to let's throw money here or throw money there. There was a thought process behind it. I'm very analytical, being a lawyer by training, so I like to look at those things that way. And just because Lenox may have more money or more availability doesn't necessarily mean we need to spend it either. In Adams, the converse was true. If we really increased that budget, we had to justify it. The public process really came through the finance committee aspect of it. We had a 15-person finance committee. We got that down to 9, I believe, which was a little bit of a struggle, but that was wrangling, quite a few different opinions at a 15-member finance committee. So the public was involved there. I think I like that question very much because I don't think there's a lot of understanding of municipal finance. It's a strange, when you're in it, such as Chris Ketchum was and those of us now, when you know it, you know it. And folks like you that have served for a while, you know it takes you a while, whether you're a town manager or a select board member, to get to know it. So we involve the public through the select board meetings. We involve the public through the finance committee meetings. We did as much as we could to publish the numbers. I don't know if it was ever sufficient enough, but that was how we did it. One thing I do like about the Lenox process, and I can tell you that I've watched most of the select board meetings starting probably back in January all the way through to probably about sometime in August, reviewed some of the minutes of the finance committee meetings. And I like the level of involvement that the community has naturally here in Lenox, whether it's the building committee that Tom is on or some of the other aspects of it. I think we don't have to, in Adams, we felt like we had to put the hook out, the circus hook, and wheel people in and say, do you want to come in and actually understand this? I find here, what I've looked at so far, that process naturally happens. It doesn't mean we can't do better.
Okay, thank you.
So Jay, you know that Lenox residents are highly engaged in our processes here in town. So how do you manage constituent concerns when they come up, and how do you engage residents on particularly contentious issues? Can you give us a few examples of how you handle positive and more challenging
Sure.
interactions?
The positive ones are always the easiest ones and the ones that I enjoy doing the most. The negative ones, or the ones that you can anticipate being negative, are the ones that are a little bit more of a challenge to pick up that phone. Initially, most of the complaints come through the executive assistant in my office, Bree. She handles the routine matter ones, and she can triage most of those. A lot of times, they're meant for the department heads. There's an aversion to going to the department heads, or some folks may not know. So Bree will immediately send that. The DPW can handle that for you. The Board of Health can handle that for you. And for the most part, we get good response to that. People just don't know who to call, so they call the town manager's office. If it gets tricky, it'll get to me, and I'll return the telephone call. Sometimes it comes in through email. It's not my favorite thing to do, again, particularly when it's negative. When things are contentious, I find face-to-face is much better dealing with that. As unpleasant as it may be, it's the only way really to read a person, to get to know them, and for them to actually get to know you. There needs to be a trust developed between a municipal official and the individual sitting across from you, that even though at the end of the day they may not appreciate the answer, they may not get the answer that they wanted, they at least know that there was a thought process and they were heard. A lot of times people just want to be heard. And it's just an effort to sit down for 10 or 15 minutes. And I generally will not do it alone. I'll bring in the department head. Generally, it has something to do that I don't necessarily have the detailed knowledge of, or the weeds. If it's a building inspector matter, the building inspector needs to be there. If it's a code enforcement issue, the code enforcement officer needs to be there. Sometimes it's a police matter or a law enforcement matter. I want the chief there. It isn't just the town administrator or the town manager who's responsible for these operations. It's the department head. They're the subject matter expert. So I find in person and bringing the subject matter in there. Sometimes I'll ask for a select board member to be there. A lot of times if they don't like the town manager's response, they go to you. So I think it's important to keep the select board or the particular member of the select board that may have gotten the constituent call informed as to what the issue was and why we just can't do it this way. After 6 years in one location, you get to begin to predict a little bit of who they may call or what the issue may be. So some of it has gone by the wayside, but every now and then you get one that you just didn't expect.
Can you expand on that a little bit with Greylock Glen?
Greylock Glen has been a challenge because those of us that are there now moving the project forward weren't necessarily there for the visioning of it. So we're standing there and we're defending a vision that the community came up with several years prior. And by the nature of the project, the way that the funding came through, the funding has come through 5, 6, 7, 8 years after the community had a full-blown conversation about it. And some of that information was not retained. Some folks that are interested in the project now weren't involved at that process. So it's been very hard to try to communicate to say, this is what the community has decided to do, and this is why we're doing it. I don't necessarily know if we've done a great job with it. I think we were patiently taking our time with the outdoor center. I think when the outdoor center came in, that funding for the outdoor center came in, we got very excited about it, and not long thereafter, we received the interest for the campground. So we were very celebratory, thinking all of that aversion to development was gone. And we had a select board meeting, we had set it up, we had the chosen developer come in, talk about the campground, and we realized, oh, this didn't go the way that we had anticipated. And we learned from that. And then, unfortunately, as with any development project or with any controversial project, you're gonna have your negative Nellies, out there with it. A few of them, we've gone face to face with them. We've sat down with them. We've taken the file, the spreadsheets, and we've said, feel free to take this home, mark it up, and come back, and we'll answer all of your questions. Some have taken us up on it, some haven't. Others don't want to talk to us because they don't want the answers. So we haven't really, other than what you've read in the newspaper, the phone doesn't ring, the emails don't come in. It's just been a select group of people. It's like anything else in this society, the positive comments don't come in the amount or frequency that you would like, as opposed to some of the negative ones. But this Friday is the grand opening of the outdoor center. We're excited about it. It's a great day for the community, a great day for the town, great day for the region, the county as a whole with outdoor recreation. And we're moving ahead. So it's been a challenge, it's been exhausting. Some people have heard me say in Adams, I'm tired. And it's been a lot. The town handed me a lot in 6 years. I think any community that has gone through the turnover of department heads that we had, as I mentioned in my cover letter, handling the Greylock Glen project, having to take on the other rehabilitation project at the wastewater treatment plant, we did a lot. I think we packed probably 12 plus years of work into 6. And I don't think I realized it until we were almost done with some of them. So, wow, we can take a breath now. So it's been a lot. But managing the constituent aspects of it, communication is a key. I can't say I always do a great job with it. We try our best. A lot of it depends on the other person on the other end of the phone, if they're open-minded to it. Sometimes you just have to hang up. Sorry, I don't think there's anything more than I can offer to this.
Well, it looks like it's a beautiful project, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And it looks like it's going to be super fun.
It's open to the public, so if you'd like to come up, take a look on Friday. It'll be open for the majority of the day. Please do.
Thanks, Jay.
All right, well, I'll avoid any existing projects and just talk about working with the select board. Dave and Ed have been here long enough to have picked Chris when he was probably not even on the short list. I knew Chris before either of us were involved in town, just from having been living in we knew each other from near Boston, and then it turned out we were both from the Berkshires, and we ended up with our kids in the same school and coached youth soccer before anything. So there's select board members who have been through this. We always change who sits in the chair title every year, no matter who's elected or who's not elected. So, Ed, I think, is probably the guy who gets physically into the office the most. I'm the guy that can get there really early or after work or ignore work. But yet we still work together, and we have almost never completely disagreed. And even if we completely disagree, it's only like maybe two of us, and we're still like, well, let's wait to hear what the town wants, and then that's usually our best guidance. So I think we're easy to work with, but are you comfortable with that level of we all interact with you different ways?
Yes, very much so. Adams has had a good board. I will tell you, I have three great relationships with him. One is a challenge, and then the other one is relatively new, so I haven't really been able to develop much of a relationship. But this also, one thing I learned from watching those meetings was the timbre of those conversations and the demeanor. And watching you interact with each other is one of the reasons why I'm here. I want to be part of that. It was frankly refreshing to watch that. It was refreshing to watch your interaction with Chris and the way that you interacted with him. There was positive feedback. It wasn't adversary. Not that my relationship now is adversary, but it was a tenor there that I really appreciated, and I enjoyed watching that. It was the same thing with town meeting. It was the same thing with the special town meeting for the residency. And even when there was public enthusiasm for the residency requirement, I watched that meeting, and I particularly wanted to watch it. I wanted to see how residents presented themselves and how the board responded and how they responded to the board. And even when there was disagreement, it's what New England, small town America, frankly, should be, respectful with it. There was no anger, there was no misplaced collusion or conspiracy theories. It was very simply, thank you for allowing me to speak, even though I disagree with you. And I want to be part of that. I want to be part of a community that still views that way and has a great working relationship. I work for you. So I have to develop that relationship, and everybody works differently, and that's the responsibility of the town manager to work that. When in Adams for 6 years, I had some members that preferred to come in the office afterward. I made those arrangements. That's my job. Made those arrangements in the morning. We had a developer who wanted to call us from Hong Kong, so I was in the office at 7:30 one morning because they're a 12-hour difference, and it was great to sit there in Adams talking with a developer from Hong Kong. You do what you have to do to get the job done. And I would, if you choose me for the job, I would certainly figure out how do you want to be communicated. Do you prefer phone? What do you want to do? And we can have those conversations.
Okay. Jay, thank you for saying that about the select board. I mean, we work hard at being a team, not an adversarial group.
It shows.
We work really hard at it, so thanks for noticing.
It shows.
that.
And I'll also add, at town meeting, I speak at town meeting in Adams, and I think that's probably just the way it's been. But it was refreshing when Chris got done speaking and sat down. You folks stood up and delivered the warrants. You each had a piece to that, and you delivered. I thought that was fantastic because it's a lonely job. Chris will tell you that if he hadn't already, and he and I, chatted. It doesn't matter the town you're in, it's a lonely job. Mayor's a lonely job too. Pete will tell you that, Jen will tell you that. So it was nice to sit there and just see that, and that was another attractive thing. I look forward to being able to work in that environment.
So Jay, you come from a similar town as Lenox. There's a lot of different departments in the town. You run them all. They're all people. We have to get along with people, so you're balancing a lot of things a lot of the time. Tell us an example or what your tack is on dealing with all these different departments, make them come together for a common goal and work together and get the jobs done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the role of a leader and how to impart the vision that you have or a select board has on everybody. It's personality based, for sure. I do monthly department head meetings I won't have a meeting just for the sake of a meeting, but you have to get everybody together in the same room at some point. So I've done that. That's worked out very well. We allow an open time for people just to share what they're doing in different departments. Some people that work in particular buildings never see other people. You work in the Council of Aging building and you have no reason to go to town hall. You may not ever meet certain people. So at least with department heads, it forces everybody to get together. I like to walk around. I guess there was that old saying years ago, management by walking around. There's a time to sit at the desk, and sometimes I get the ball and chain. I get tied to the desk. I come in, I get very focused, and I just want to get this stuff done, particularly during the budget season. But I found it very beneficial to get out and walk about. I don't think I do it enough. I think there's some people that would also say we see too much of you. So you got to find the balance. But DPW, I'm not afraid to go out in the work crew. I've plowed with the crew before. In fact, I told the screening committee, I shared the story. The town decided to buy a paver, a small paver. We decided to try to do some of it in-house just to be able to save some money. So we bought a brand new paver with Chapter 90 money. And we put the paver out, and they received their training, and the crew was very excited about going out. So they went out into a particular neighborhood. They had already identified what street they wanted to go on. They knew which one we got the most complaints over, and they were adamant that they wanted to do this. So that day I went out with them, and they were short. The police department was short because we had other projects going on. So the chief of police and I essentially did traffic patrol. So I was standing out there with my vest and my shirt and tie directing traffic. And I don't necessarily think that was bad duty for the town manager, because one, a lot of people saw me out there and said, hey, geez, this is great. There's a few other maybe not so positive comments, but the DPW crew really appreciated that. They saw the town manager out there, not just the department head, but the town manager out there as well. It also helped me. I don't pave. I know enough to be dangerous with some of this stuff. I like infrastructure and I like equipment. So I understand how it works, but I needed to really be sure that they knew how to use the asset, they knew how to use the resource, and that the thousands of dollars that we invested in it was going to pay back to the community. So I wanted to see that, and I wanted to see how the crew. It's a lot easier with firsthand, evidence to be able to say, yes, this worked, and it was valuable. So I do things like that as well. I have an open door policy. I try to, constituents, I prefer if they make an appointment because I need to know what they want to speak about. I may not know off the top of my head, and they just have to come back. But with staff, it's always an open door. They can waltz in at any time. I prefer, if it's somebody that reports to a department head, that they obviously bring the department head. I'm not the runaround for the department head, but department heads always had free reign to come in. Hey, can I bother you? Of course.
We would do a liaison assignments here, we'll call it. And, Dave has always been a fire in the police department. I've always been a DPW because that's been my thing. The reason I say that is because I'm wondering how the paver worked out.
So far, so good. I wish, the price of hot mix is restrictive. So the crew did a good job with it. They trained well. They trained with almost like an airport mix. The augers on the machine could handle it. So we didn't waste any material. We bought the liquid spray that goes down the tack coat first. So we bought that. The guys love equipment. It's a small crew. It's only 13 of them, but they have a lot of heart. We have some young guys that really just want to get out there and do something. They don't like the negative attention. They don't like the complaints either. They drive on the same roads, whether they live in town or not. They still drive on them. So they were very anxious to get out there and try it. We have a fleet of single axle internationals. So we tried 2 of those along with we rented a triaxle and discovered the triaxle was too big. So the next time around, we won't necessarily have to rent the triaxle. If anything, we'll try to get one of our third single axle internationals in line to handle hot mix. We had to time the planning between the trips to go down and back. So it worked out fairly well. While they were doing it, there were other opportunities that, things sat on the shelf and waited for. It's a priority, basis. But we were able to pave 2,100 linear feet of road for under $20,000 that, it may not be a tremendous length, but if you drove over that road every day, over the same, split pavement and cracked pavement, it made a difference to those people using that road for travel. And it's just chip away at it.
Great, thank you.
On the infrastructure vein, obviously every town has infrastructure needs, we're no different, whether it's roads or we have a lot of historic buildings. We're also doing capital projects like the new public safety building. Can you walk us through a time where you've taken a capital project from conception to finish while staying in budget?
The wastewater treatment plant, I'm happy to say, was that way. When I started in Adams, I walked around all the different facilities, and it was readily apparent. The select board had mentioned it to me. Other people that I had started to meet within my first few months mentioned facilities was lacking. Attention the can had been pushed down too far down the road. There was no facilities department. They had 2 custodians. They had no one to report to, so they had no management. So wastewater plant was also an issue in terms of 50% of the plant was essentially mothballed. The plant was designed to handle about 10 million gallons of effluent a day. And it was built at a time in 1970 when Adams still had most of the mill complex, discharging into it. So on average, we were only handling about 1.9 to 2 million gallons of effluent a day, a little higher during the rainy season with I&I infiltration inflow issues that would come into it. But of the 2 clarifiers, primary clarifiers, one was completely shut down and abandoned. And we had 6 aeration basins with 6 drive motors on the auger system. 3 were the original units that were installed in 1970 with 480 volt. And as soon as we turned them on, we would get electrical surcharge for them. And 3 of them have been upgraded. So really only 50% of the plant had been upgraded. But what I realized is that if any one of those components failed in the effluent stream, we were out of service. And we were going to expose the town to the EPA fines. We were going to be in violation of our NEPTES discharge permit. And when the plant operator, or chief operator, and the superintendent realized that I could appreciate that, they began to tell me we have to do something. So we engaged Ty and Bond. We sat down with Ty and Bond. They had done the previous work, so we chose them because we were able to save money. They already had the plans. They already knew they already knew what was done, so we didn't have to pay for that again and reacclimate. And engineers are not cheap, so we wanted to save some money that way. So Ty and Bond came in. They designed the project. We went to the Massachusetts Water Abatement Trust. I think that's still the term of it. And at the time, a lot of the federal money was going into it. The recovery money was going. I forgot the acronym because I need to pull the acronym, and now I can't think of it. All of that money went into that, so we were able to access those federal funds through the state funds, which we thought was a good deal. That brought down the debt service payment a little bit. So we came up with a design. Of course, we couldn't do everything we wanted. We had some alternates, HVAC issues and things like that in the building, some livability issues for the staff. But really, we wanted to be sure we could get VF drive motors installed, get the plant back up to where it needed to be for redundancy purposes, and also to do duplex maintenance of it. Clarifier 1 could be shut down for a period of time. We can go in there, perform maintenance. Clarifier 2 can come on service for 6 months, rotate, vice versa. I asked Ty and Bond, I wanted an asset management plan so that my first few years, all of a sudden it was, well, this motor failed. Well, did you anticipate the motor failing? No. Well, I didn't anticipate the motor failing because you didn't tell me, so it's not in the budget. How are we supposed to pay for that? We have very limited reserve fund, so I was very restrictive in just, that's not the way to manage, and that's not the way to spend taxpayer dollars. So we came up with an asset management plan, so now we know going forward, next year will be the first year that we do it, we'll know which components of the plant need to be replaced and what the estimated cost is so we can build that into the capital budget. So Ty and Bond ran the project. They were the project management team on it. And I think we left maybe $8,000, $9,000 on the table, I think, at the end. We got lucky with the project. We covered a few change orders internally that we just thought we could do a better price if we locally bid it out, rather than putting it through the project where you have to use the contractor up costs and all that stuff. So that's one. Nobody pays attention to wastewater treatment, but everybody uses it, and it's an essential public service. So I'm kind of proud of that one, that we did that. I know the plant morale went up because of it. There's been quite a few other small things, but that's probably the largest one I've kind of seen all the way through.
That's great.
The Greylock Lens stuff's been interesting, but some of that stuff started before me. I've just been lucky to be the guy in the seat that finally gets to cut the ribbon.
So, you all set?
Yep, I am, yes.
Talk about schools for a minute. This is something new for you. The town's responsible for generating the funds to fund the schools. Schools ask us for money and we go back and forth. Sometimes it can create some tension, a little bit of tension. And we want to certainly, first of all, I want to say we have great schools. And we also have a lot of people on fixed income who keep an eye on their taxes and what we do to their taxes. And the school accounts for more than half of our budget. So just talk a little bit how you would approach the fine line between working with the school and the town.
I looked at Lenox and Adams are almost very close. 54% of Lenox budget is to the schools. And I want to say Adams is, boy, if it's not 50, it's 49 or 51% last time I checked. So it's structured similarly. I always say, you know, as soon as the tax bills come in, the first big check, and we have two, we support two, the vocational, McCann Regional, and we support Music Valley. So that, it's been an issue. I think it's just a lot of communication. I developed a good relationship with the school superintendent. It's great that the superintendent's office is across the hall. And I think it's just incumbent that the town manager develop a great relationship with that team and be able to sit down and talk about the needs. The fact that it's the Lenox school system is, I think, more advantageous for a town manager than the way it's structured now that I deal with when it's a district. You have a school committee, you have another town. You may have just read in the paper that one town rejected the budget, so that forced the whole town-wide vote that I don't think anyone had gone through in a long time. And that creates just a lot of uncertainty. It affects setting the tax rate by the state. Then affects getting the tax bills out. If that process hadn't occurred and it was rejected, we were going to have to go through it all again. So a lot of that is communication and sitting down, and early on in the budget process, I would say, of saying, you know, what are your needs are, and also sitting down with the select board and saying, what are we looking at this year? What goals do you have for the budget process this year? What percentage would you like me to communicate to the schools that they need to keep to? We did that for a while. We said, you know, you need to hold it to 3%. And if they came back and needed more, they needed to defend that. And we would have a lot of meetings, non-quorum meetings with one or two members of the select board that were interested in the school budget, myself, member of the school committee, school superintendent, sometimes the business manager was there. And it was a collaborative, you know, conversation. And sometimes decisions were made, well, let the public, you know, decide this. And other times the select board, you know, members had told me just, you know, hold them back. We just can't afford that this year. And it's Massachusetts does not really allow a good structure for that. It's an internal systematic pull.
Just a little follow-up on that. One thing that we all have strived to do is to try to keep compensation increases to various departments, including the schools, which is 90% salaries, I would think, or a good portion of them, somewhat on an equivalent basis, so that one department doesn't get a 4% raise and one doesn't get a 2% raise, because that creates all kinds of problems.
It does.
So we've worked hard at that over the years, and so just like to hear your thoughts on how you would approach that.
We had that issue in Adams when I started. We have three unions, police, all the administrative staff or clerical staff in DPW, and we have non-union folks, salary folks, or the private, the confidential admin assistants. It was all over the place. And that just, as you said, Dave, that just creates morale issues with people. So each time a union contract came up, and I think I've done 2 or 3 each now, I believe, we made sure that we bargained for the increases, the COLAs are identical in any given year. And if they weren't, say just for example, we did 2.5% in one year for one group, and in that same year we did 3%, there was an offset in another year to keep them equal. One year, maybe 2 years ago at this point, we had it was a good fiscal year for the town. And it was the one year, I want to say DPW was held back to a lower rate, and I want to say it was by 0.5%. And the other two unions were going to get 0.5% more. So I sat down with the town accountant and I said, what does this translate to if we did this based on years of service for the staff, all the staff? What does that 0.5% equal? And the number was manageable. So there was a clause that we had inserted that allowed either the union or the town to come back and impact, bargain. So I wrote a letter to the union and said, we appreciate the work that you've been doing. We want to treat everybody fairly. There were no significant service disruptions this year. You go above and beyond. So we gave them that 0.5%. Some town managers may look and say, what are you, nuts? But I felt it was the right thing to do, and we could afford it. If we couldn't have afforded it, I never would have done that. But I at least wanted to analyze it and look at it. So I tried my best. My staff has tried the best to treat everybody equally, onboarding people in terms of number of weeks of time off. What step, we have a grade and step system. What step you bring people on. For a while we were lagging. I think we were paying laborers $16 an hour to start DPW. Who? In Walmart and McDonald's and jobs that don't require working outside 16 hours plowing, how are you going to attract anybody to that? So we began to have to bring people in at a higher step. Finally, when the union contract was able to negotiate, we were able to shift all of that down. But it took the town accountant, Crystal, at that point, she did a great job of just being able to put the spreadsheets together for us so we can look at what the financial impact was. So it's important to me that the staff knows they're treated well. Even if in one given year they may not feel that way, they know they're being heard, and they know that we'll try to adjust it at some point. The school comparisons happen all the time. I used to have a couple of the DPW folks and even the police folks come in with the list of, do you know what this person's making in the school department? I hear you, but I can't control what the teachers union schedule pays. Well, they're getting a stipend for this, a stipend for that. And it's just trying to have a conversation with them and focus on the positive aspects of it, and then do what you can within your control to compensate them. This year was a challenge. We renegotiated the DPW contract, and it was a big one. We had the capacity in the budget, we had the levy capacity for it, and we had to do it. We were not getting, we were all pooled up. You all had a group of folks that all started around the same time, so they're all gonna be eligible for retirement at the same time. And with that, you lose your institutional knowledge, you lose ethic, you pass down a lot that way, particularly with DPW. So we knew we wanted to approach this with recruitment and retention goals. So we instituted paying for CDLs with a buyback period. So you work for the town of Adams for 5 years, and if you leave at the end of 5, you're all set. But if you leave within that 5-year period, we're prorate what we invested in you back. The union was thrilled with that, and we did a pretty big, wage increase, but we didn't do that in a vacuum. We called every other town. We're a small county. We all chat. I called Chris. I called all the other communities and said, can you share this with me? And everybody does, and you have the spreadsheet. My admin puts it all, I give her all the data, she puts it all in there. So when I went to the select board and went to the finance committee, we're not just doing this in a vacuum. Here's where we want to land, here's what we can afford, and here's where other communities are. And that's how we were able to get it through, and I think morale was high for it, and we have good relationships with the bargaining units. There's no grievances, there's none of that. If there's any issues, they come in and they chat, and we try to resolve it without any of that. That process costs money, it costs time, it creates bad blood, and there's no reason for that. We can sit down and we can find a solution for it.
Thank you.
Okay, you mentioned it this briefly, that property taxes are a significant concern for all taxpayers. So especially with the limited commercial tax revenue. How have you made decisions that affect the tax rate? And we have a split tax rate here. We have a residential rate and a commercial rate. And how do you make those tough choices between raising taxes and possibly cutting services?
It's a very difficult conversation to have. And we look at the budget and we determine, are we effectively delivering services? And if we are, then we don't need to increase it at all. We look at it also from a deficiency mindset. Where are we deficient in delivering these services? What's the feedback been over the past year? What are the department heads? What do they need? What are they telling us? And what are the select board and finance committees hear from the general public? What is it that they like? What is it that they don't like? Adams does not have we don't have the enterprise funds that Lenox has. That is a significant limiting factor for the town of Adams. And if, that's definitely something that the town has to look into, for that. But municipal services are not inexpensive. And there's a reason why the private sector does not do them. So it's a mixture of controlling your expenditures to make sure that your level of service delivery is adequate for what the community expects. And at the same time, making sure you're delivering them in a very efficient manner. What's your staffing level? What does the fleet look like? What are the work rules? All of those things. What are the material bidding process? Are you part of the county bidding process? All of those things go into how much it costs to deliver the services. And then every year, we also look at it, myself and some of the department heads, I always tell them, worst case scenario, what is it that you can live without? What is it that you don't need? During the COVID pandemic, we looked at that and said, what is it that we don't need anymore? What is it that's not essential to municipal functions? And, we looked at some of the human services, the public service delivery, the library, council on aging. At one point, we had it down to nothing more than myself, the police, and public safety, public works, public safety. So every year it's an analysis of looking at it. And again, the hard part, I think, is trying to explain to folks, none of us, you folks in an elected position or a municipal manager ever sits there and says just arbitrarily, no, let's just raise it this year because we need to spend this money. None of us do that. But sometimes there's an impartation that we do. And I struggle with it myself. I think I always will. And I consider myself a decent communicator. We don't know how to get through to everybody. Social media is not the answer. The media is different. Social media, the newspaper is different than what it used to be. Not the same anymore. People don't read it. You have coverage. Clarence is here. He does great coverage, but if people don't read his article, they're not going to know. So it's hard. It's hard to communicate to people what that cost is. And that's what we struggle with, I think, the most. But really, it comes down to what's essential in any given year, or do we really need that? And also, one of the things I really like about Lenox, too, is the shared services model that's been adopted. The building commissioner, the Tri-Town Health. I think there's a lot of efficiency there. And I think that's a great mindset. And I think more communities in the Berkshires really have to start looking at that in order to have more efficient delivery of services in a cost-effective manner. Technically speaking, code enforcement should be the same in Lee, Lenox, Pittsfield, Adams, and North Adams as it is anywhere. And I think it's great that Lenox has kind of finally cracked that and is looking at that. And that'd be something else I'd always want to look at. Where else can we do better service delivery more efficiently without cutting?
Great, thank you.
We're back to me. I always pause because I'm trying to make sure that everyone here is nodding also, because I see them face to face and then I see them on text. So, we have the public safety building. We've appropriated money through town for that. We've appropriated money for the wastewater treatment upgrade. We are fairly certain USDA has, at a minimum, offered us below market rate opportunities to bond it. We've yet to be able to meet as a PBC to approve and hear what their grant actually is, but we think it's there. We need Bill Gopp for that. And we've got 3 PBC members here tonight. We're going to try to meet next Wednesday.
We are, yes.
We're going to meet next Wednesday. School's going through, they went to bat a few times through MSBA. I don't think the town wanted anything to do with it at first, so they didn't have much backing. Then the town sort of agreed, despite all of anybody's opinion whether we should have our school or not. We actually have more kids to educate than we did before, and many of them actually born here. So we're gonna like be able, and we have also preempted, in some cases, following Chris's recommendation, and then we invented our own stabilization fund for unanticipated bridge work, but there's actually only 2 bridges in Lenox, and they're, in terrific shape, so.
That's great news.
The way Chris is required to present, or any town manager for that matter, is here's what it looks like probably 6 to 7 years down the road. We've got stabilization funds that will offset probably 2 or 3 years, at least get us through construction. But we're gonna bond down the road at some point. By that point, if our growth occurs just because valuations of, properties are still higher because there's very little inventory, or commercial businesses actually, can operate in one of our things, that'll offset it too, but we're still able to bond, and we have a AAA bond rating, and if nothing else, let's keep that.
Mm-hmm. I think Lenox is I've chatted with Chris about some of those projects, and having 3 of them at the same time in Adams, I appreciate the need for them. Some of you can't choose when you need to do the wastewater treatment plant. You can't choose sometimes when you need to do the school. It comes up, it creeps up on you. You need to do it. And you can't say one is more important than the other. Frankly, they're all important. So the key is really to how do we pay for that? When we go outside and look for other funds, particularly federal funds, all of that always comes with strings attached. And sometimes if a community has the ability, as Lenox does with its AAA rating, as you said, Neil, sometimes that may be the better route to go, simply because you don't have the reporting requirements, or it may not cost you as much in the long run as it would actually borrowing money from another source. That was one of the conversations we had about the wastewater treatment plant project. Now, that was a very competitive program. We had the federal funds, in there, and the interest rate was very low, but it's still a heavy debt, burden for it. But that's a lot of work to take on. In addition to the work and the project management, was probably the more fun part about it. Really, that key is how to pay for it, and then how to watch that as it goes down the road. I don't think you could have had a better town manager at the time where all that stuff came up, because Chris was just, I can't sit here and say that I can fill his shoes. But when it came to putting together all that plan, he's the guy.
Well, hopefully you saw in the meeting, it wasn't until we managed to convince Chris to stand up and be embarrassed with applause that we were done talking enough that someone called the meeting and everyone was enthusiastic, maybe minus, I don't know, some percent, to just put that word non-resident for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question we have on the list, and you kind of answered a little bit on the question that Max asked you about the capital projects and the way you handled the wastewater treatment plant. I just want to say I liked your answer. It sounded like you understand that kind of stuff, which is big in my book. But has there been any other, and I'm sure, well, you've only been there 6 years, has there been any, whether it's financial or some kind of crisis that's come up that right out of left field, but a big thing, but you had to maintain all the proper services, keep the town running, but deal with this?
EMS service. The way that Adams is structured, the fire service and EMS service are not part of town government. So the fire response, structural fire, is part of a fire district, founded in 1873 and run by a 3-member prudential committee. The town select board, town manager has no jurisdiction or control over it at all. We have no town-funded EMS services. It was performed by Adams Ambulance, which was a 501c3 nonprofit organization created probably in the early 70s when most of the organized paramedic services came about. and they were operating for a period of time. We got through COVID with it. And then I want to say it was probably 2 years ago or so, out of left field came the knock on the door saying, we need a subsidy. Well, with a limited tax base and every year with a limited levy capacity because of fixed costs, other things that the town wants to do, and just the cost of providing quality EMS service, that was going to be a Proposition 2.5 override likelihood for the town of Adams. And that was not anything that we could have been walked through. So thankfully, with some emergency management experience and being networked, we went to the state, we got some advice from the state, but particularly Northern Berkshire EMS, they're just a great group of people, and we got educated. I sat down with their general manager and their chief, John Meany, and said, John, teach me all about the EMS world. I don't know anything about it. I know when I need it, and I have a constituent or I call 911, I don't care what the uniform looks like, I don't care what the color is on the rig. I want someone who's qualified to respond to the house. So tell me all about the finances. So we had to learn all about insurance reimbursement. We had to learn about service zone plans. So myself and Christine Hoyt from the select board, we pretty much did that together. Got that lesson. She went and briefed her colleagues, and then I sat down with the police chief and emergency management director, and we came up with some contingency plans. And then at the same time, Adams Ambulance was doing what they wanted to do. They were making whatever statements they wanted to make to the newspaper. So our focus at that time was, how do we maintain, what control do we have to maintain EMS service? So that when a resident calls 911, someone will respond. Now, our police department are first responder equipped, but that only covers a limited amount of medical calls. So we were able to come up with an agreement with Northern Berkshire EMS that if Adams Ambulance closed their doors, and they were saying they would, and they were saying they would do so without adequate notice, that we'd be able to bring in Northern Berkshire EMS almost immediately. So we had to work with Sheriff's Control on dispatch. We had to work through radio frequency issues. Thankfully, Northern Berkshire EMS is, they're a 501c3 nonprofit as well. They required no subsidy. But when it got to the point where Adams Ambulance was not going to be able to pull themselves out of this financial hole, and they had to cease service, and then the licensing authority got involved with them as well, we also had to find garaging for Northern Berkshire EMS because Adams Ambulance had a private building in town. So we had this old archaic structure that all of a sudden was incongruent with the way that things were happening now. So our forest wardens, who are the forest fire guys, not the structural guys, they moved one of their pieces of equipment out. We had an individual store the fire apparatus elsewhere. We put an ambulance in the forest warden's garage. We had the building inspector go in. We made sure everything was up to snuff. Excuse me. And we adapted very quickly to it. It was a crash course. But the first thing that we did was find somebody who could teach us the mechanics of it. What are we talking about? Should we just issue a check to Adams Ambulance? Is that what the answer is? And we learned that that wasn't necessarily the case. It was contentious. There's a lot of legacy and a lot of history with some of those services, particularly in a small community. And I don't think people liked understanding that their ambulance service with Adams on the side was going away. And those of us that had to make very difficult decisions, we tried to communicate the best we could. The newspaper gave us what coverage they could. Spectrum gave us what, we spoke to whoever wanted to talk to us about it. And at the end of the day, the finances are not possible for the town of Adams to pay for an EMS service. But yet, things that we talk about in this room, when the town managers meet, monthly, is we know that's a rarity for Northern Berkshire. We know what's happening in Southern Berkshire. Smitty's been, involved in that. So it's refreshing that Lenox is able to pay for its own and not necessarily be in that predicament. But that was a left fielder that we didn't see coming.
So do you guys have a fire district now?
We have the fire district. The fire district, they do their own thing. Mm-hmm. They also control water as well. Wow. So we don't have any control over a critical development asset. We don't control the policy. We don't control the rate. We don't control where it should expand in town in order to expand development. And we don't control the fire service ID number that you need in order to get a grant to supply equipment. So the forest wardens in 1 year could get a piece of equipment. if we were able to use the fire ID number that's given to the town of Adams. But the fire district retains that number. So the town of Adams taxpayer has to purchase any of the equipment that we want to equip the forest wardens with, which is also our CERT team, Community Response, Emergency Response Team, which came about 2002 after September 11th. We're trying to come up with a regional CERT team to respond to emergency management issues, down trees. They're probably more responsive than DPW can be sometimes. Traffic control for flooding issues. They're just a good involved group of people. So they have a side-by-side. We had to get a trailer for the side-by-side. The 1975 Ford pumper sprung leaks, and although we did our best, I put the forest wardens chief through the ringer, do everything we can, well, no, you're gonna try to fix that. What about this and what about that? And finally, when I realized he reached the end of the road, I said, okay, now we'll look for another truck. But I needed to make sure that people knew we just weren't getting a new truck for the sake of a new truck. But all of that couldn't be on grant because of that split structure, and that holds the town back.
You shared with us earlier that, having watched some of the CTSB footage, that you appreciated the interaction with townsfolk and with the select board, but beyond that, what made you interested in this position?
It's almost a question, Max, of why not for a town manager. Chris wasn't kidding when he said, to the media, it's probably the best place to be a town manager. When you look at a community as a town manager, you want the best case scenario you can so you can really focus on the nuts and bolts of the job and improving what's already there. Lenox finances allow for that. I'm just very impressed with looking at it, not only from conversing with Chris, but actually looking at the numbers. That allows the town manager to come in and breathe. It allows the town manager to come in and be able to address these issues and concerns that people have. One of the worst positions to be in, I feel, as a town manager, is to know that there's a critical issue, like a bridge, and you just can't do it. In the position I'm in now, I can't even pave a road because of the cost and because of the finances. And we've done our best with finances, but we can't seem to get over that. So the ability to come into a community that has the financial security that Lenox does is attractive to me. The demeanor, the tenor, as I said, very important. But also too, as I previously mentioned, the fact that Lenox is looking at shared services. We've tried some shared services. I think we'll eventually get there. They kind of flow in a direction as different dominoes fall, the other ones fall. But I appreciate that very much down here. And speaking with some of the other town managers, Great Barrington, Stockbridge, being two of them, I think there's a great collaboration that I haven't been able to experience in Northern Berkshire, and I look forward to that. You don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. Other communities might be doing something just as good. There's no patent, there's no trademark attached to it. It's just good local government. And I like that environment. Mike Canales, who's in Stockbridge, he was in North Adams, so I spoke with him about it. Mark Pruinski. We have great, Smitty's attended a few of them, the town manager, county-wide meetings. We have great conversations, but I like what I see in the collaboration of South County, and I like to be a part of that.
That's terrific. I mean, one thing that's terrific about it is that if anything, Chris might have been doing more to support us than we necessarily asked him to. We don't want to, so he's a hero for that. But I'm also really pleased that he can get to all his kids' soccer games and things like that without, working on the kitchen table while also trying to see them. And so we're going to learn together, because we don't want you to not be having a life. We all live here. You can walk to at least 2, 3 of our houses from here. It's often a surprise.
Depends how much you like to walk, I guess.
Yeah. I could use to walk a little bit more, particularly when I hadn't put the suit on in a while. Chris, I think that the advantage of the fact that Chris is still in town is a great advantage, not to just whomever gets this job, but also to Lenox because he's accessible. And that's the nice thing. And I have no qualms in picking up that telephone and saying, what were you trying to do here, or why? I respect him greatly, and that's also one of the reasons why is I know that he left the ship in great shape, and it's coming in to build on that, as I said in my cover letter. It's not replacing, it's just advancing it further off of his shoulders. We're two different people. He'll tell you that for sure. So I'm not sitting here saying I'm the next Chris, but there were certain things that he did that I deserve to be emulated. But I am my own person with my own flaws, and my own issues and things like that. But I like the job. I like doing it. You say you live here. I feel two of them back here, well, my wife too, can tell you that, Lenox Station is definitely probably a second home for a period of time to their own chagrin down there. So we're certainly familiar with Lenox. I don't feel uncomfortable coming down here and offering myself if you find that I can serve the community. The search committee had asked, do you think it'll be detrimental that you don't live here? And I don't think it will. I think it's my responsibility to make sure that the community understands that I don't need to have the zip code in order to be committed to the community. Adams has certainly seen me out and about at certain businesses and about through the day, going out to lunch particularly. So I think there's folks that probably think I live in town now because I'm there so much. And that's part of my responsibility, to make sure that the community knows I'm here, I'm engaged, and I certainly want to be. But yet at the same time, it's important not to reach burnout stage and not to keep the lights burning. The pile on the desk will still be there tomorrow, but if there's a time that we need to, an ambulance issue comes up, there's a time. There's a time where you kick it into gear, and I'm certainly not afraid of picking up the phone and saying, sorry, you just left work at 3:30, but I need you back here. And those times don't creep up that much, but when they do, if you have a good relationship with your staff, and if you set your expectations, and then you appreciate them when it's over with, and you actually pat them on the back and say, great job, I can't give you a financial bonus, but we really appreciate what you did for the community, you'll get that response again the next time that you need it.
Well, it looks like you're kind of familiar with Lenox if you've been at the Berkshire Scenic Railway Museum for the last 17 years. You know where to find us.
It's been that long.
Yeah, it's been that long.
Yeah.
Tempest Fugit, yes.
Might feel that long being in Adams too, even though it's been only 6, but that's a great location down there. We had, Smitty and I talk about it frequently, and Tom's familiar with it, we had plans years ago to be able to knock down that Daily building, open that whole, area up. Open it up so October Mountain has a better, angle on it. And I don't see any reason why Berkshire Scenic can't eventually operate trains again. That's a conversation for another time. But that possibility is all still there, and I don't see why any of that. Smitty's been a great advocate for it. I don't see why any of that can't happen. It's a great organization. Lenox has great inventory of art and restaurants and tourism. I make Chris laugh all the time. Almost every town meeting for managers that we have, I always mention the lodging income or the meals tax. Well, I can tell you my lodging income in Adams is, and he would laugh. Lenox is situated really, really well to always be able to, staying on top of it, work within those clusters that one Berkshire identified. Lenox checks off almost off of them, but Berkshire Scenic is definitely, I think, a resource that we need to explore getting back on its feet for. The Polar Express was a great event. Pam, my wife, was instrumental in organizing that, and she'll tell you that the year that we didn't run trains, a lot of the Lenox lodging establishments and the restaurant operators reached out and said,
where are you?
What happened? Last year's December, occupancy rate was much higher, and Polar Express didn't run. So we knew the fun trains had an economic impact. We knew there was an economic multiplier. And the Adams operation just expanded it. It's a lot more work, Tom will tell you that. But it can definitely be counting again in the potential down here. The state investment in the railroad, there's no reason why we can't run tourist trains on it. Smitty and I talk all the time about it. And also too, that's to get back to your question, 2MAX why. The rest of River is very impactful. and I'm crazy to probably say I'm interested in helping. I'm not crazy enough to say that it's a solution, but the real aspect of it, you sit there and you read the newspaper articles, and having the education I have and the experience in it, I sit there and I say, there's got to be something better here with it. So I hope to be able to contribute at that level as well, for what that may be worth.
We gotta leave that alone.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to talk about the, we had a question on that, which these guys can completely fill you in. Does anyone have any more specific questions, or do you want to let him
No, I don't have anything.
riff on anything you want, or ask us questions?
Yeah, why don't you ask us some questions if you want?
Sure. One thing I have is, where do you see, what do you want to see in the next town manager? What is it that, what do you think some of the challenges are for the town? What are some of the characteristics that you think work best in Lenox? What have you seen not work well? What areas do you think the next town manager should be paying some attention to?
I think, if I may, I think one of the, we certainly worked with Chris on this, but I think one of the most important things is that you identify what's coming up. We don't kick the can down the road. You mentioned that, you witnessed that. So, but we don't know where the can is. Sometimes it comes up in front of you. And even collectively, all of us can't necessarily identify everything that's coming down the pike. You're the boots on the ground. So I'd like to see continued, and similarly to what Chris had done, but maybe even more enhanced, identifying what's out there in a year, 2 years, 5 years, and so we can reserve for it. I think we were the first community to develop OPED, which we have some significant amount of money in that account.
8 million.
Yes, right. And there was nothing there 10 years ago. So I think we've done a pretty good job of identifying the cans and planning for them. There are several others too. But the point being, we don't like surprises. And I think it's incumbent upon the town manager to identify what those issues are so we don't get surprised. And I'd like to see that continue.
Yeah, we did a master plan, like 3 years ago. I think 2021 is when it was approved. Excuse me. And so what we try to do is we try to look at the short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals in that plan, and try to go back and look at it at least once a year and see if we've checked anything off. And I know that we have not done that probably in about 12 or 14 months. So we would need to look at that, because I think we do a good job in making progress on that, and it should be a roadmap for how we're managing things here in town. But it's one that we need to constantly look back at. So I think that would be useful.
I'm not a change, but I'd like to see a continuation, if you were chosen, to have good communication with this board, with everybody, that you can, but especially with this board, because it's a very supportive board, a lot of knowledge here, and we've had that over the years. We're used to having that open door policy, a text here, a text there, really a lot of communication, no secrets at all. Everything above board, and it's served us very well.
Good.
And for me, I'll throw out too, we can't keep up with technology.
Oh, that's true.
Right? I'm listening, I have allegiance to the Bruins, for example. So I got on hockey radio as I'm driving down to New York. The hockey guys are saying, we think this guy's been traded. We saw a tweet about it, but that could be a fake tweet. And I don't know if I trust that. And they literally wait until they go to a game to see if that guy's been traded, or if he's just angry, or if he's from Russia and he can't come home, or God knows what. So I don't even try to stay ahead of social media, because it just sucks you into more and more stuff that you have a hard time believing.
I would echo everything they said. I think being in close communication with the board is key. As the most recent elected addition to the board, for me, it's also learning. As you said earlier, it takes a while to come up to speed and really understand the role. So Chris was great about mentoring and trying to share information, and that's been extremely valuable. And anyone else that joins this board, I'm sure would want that kind of relationship with the town manager, so that's something I would look for.
Mhm. No, that's good. I enjoy it. Sometimes you learn more by forcing yourself to reteach it. I have 3 manuals on my desk, and one of them is the Selectmen's Handbook, the Finance Committee Handbook, and some of the manuals I got from it. And the pages are bent over, and I'm not embarrassed by that. You do something for a period of time and you forget. And you have to go back and look at it and say, I got to refresh myself, particularly budget season. You're so happy to get through that and get over it, that for a period of time you want to forget about it. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, and it's creeping back up again. How the hell did I do this? And you got to go back and look at it. So it's, I like hearing all of those things. Communication is one of the worst parts about being, I think, a town manager is trying to manage and then, have either a member of the constituency or an employee go back to a select board member and not have that select board member understand what the situation was, particularly with a personnel matter. It's just the way that the structure is set up with us in Massachusetts with select boards and town managers. A lot of people think that power rests with the select board, and it doesn't. It rests with the town manager, but the town manager has an obligation just to keep the select board involved, so that if you do get that telephone call, oh yeah, no, I'm well aware of that, thank you very much, but that's the purview of the town manager, and he or she will deal with it, thank you.
Well, and another thing that's Chris's vision, which we have also done on our own, skip the stabilization funds against our projects. We have stabilization funds against possible apparatus purchases, OPEB obviously, and without even blinking, chiefs have interacted with other people and said, I can sell my hose. I don't need the hose, or take it out of my budget, and that budget can go to whatever you need. And
Mm-hmm. The debt stabilization account, I think, is a great concept, because that's the only way to get those large projects done without an immediate impact on the tax levy, is to borrow and bond. But if you can't afford to project out those bond payments, then every year that tax levy is hit. But if you have that stabilization account, you can minimize that. And when I asked Chris about it, and he explained, that's great. That gives, I think, anybody sitting here at this table looking at what's ahead for Lenox, knowing that there's a thoughtful plan behind that. And there's no reason to keep tweaking that and making it better. So I think Lenox is in great shape. I appreciate the opportunity to sit here and chat with you. Thanks for the consideration.
Thank you.
thank you very, very much.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
And thanks to my board members for being able to do 2 on Saturday and another one tonight.
Yes, thank you for that courtesy.